Reconciliation Commission in South Africa have been finalized. President Cyril Ramaphosa announced a week ago that he will launch an investigation on hindrances that stalled prosecution on crimes committed during apartheid. The Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, Mamoloko Kubai, says the president will make the announcement on the terms of reference for the judicial inquiry very soon.
Once the terms of reference have been announced and also the judicial team has been appointed, I will, as the minister and together with the team in the presidency and Minister Mchunu, sit together with them so that we can map out the way forward and we do the contractual processes to ensure that this starts as soon as possible. But from justice point of view, we are ready. And that's why the terms of reference have already been agreed to by ourselves, signed off by the president, and we have been able to negotiate this with the families.
The United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund in South Africa has urged government to enforce stricter advertising regulations on the baby formula industry. This after the World Health Organization and UNICEF launched a campaign called Babies Before Bottom Lines, sounding the alarm on what they say is false and unethical formula advertising. The organizations have called on formula milk companies to stop presenting incomplete scientific evidence and interfering unsupported health outcomes. UNICEF South Africa's nutrition manager, Gilbert Chitaudzi, says the scientific health claims made by formula companies discourage mothers from breastfeeding, which should always be a first choice.
Breastfeeding is how, mothers should be feeding their babies. But because of very, very strong and inappropriate marketing and promotion of formula milk, that has been eroded. When you look at the nutrition situation of the children in South Africa, you've got a high rate of children who are not growing well according to their age, meaning that, their future is literally, doomed. They're not going to grow well. They're not going to develop well. The main reason being that, the foundation is just not right.
Lastly, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says he'll visit Washington next Tuesday to meet U.S. President Donald Trump, who has imposed steep tariffs on Canada and spoken about his desire to annex it. Carney said he expects the talks to be difficult but constructive. He reiterated the old relationship with the U.S. was over, but said he wanted to chart a way forward during his meeting with President Trump.
Our focus will be on both immediate trade pressures and the broader future economic and security relationship between our two sovereign nations. My government will fight to get the best deal for Canada. We will take all the time necessary, but not more, in order to do so.
Channel Africa News, I am Onele Nzinzi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
And coming up in your sports news this hour, Malawi stand South Africa while Gambia hold Algeria in a tight first leg encounters of the CHAN qualifiers. And Kagiso Rabara suspended after a positive recreational drugs test forced him out of the IPL. I'll have details of these and other stories at 6:30.
Wake up, Africa. Peter Ndoro and Asanda Beda are here to help you rise and shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time. Only on Channel Africa.
Let's take a moment now to thank the team. On technical production is Tato Mapuroma. On social media, Talent Butelezi. On production is Hlengiwe Mabaso, Joey Likhodi, and Pumudzo Ramakadza. Tagazelo as well is in production today. It took all four producers to put our amazing show today. News on Elensinzi, you just heard her there. On sports is Musubuji Makura, and economics news coming up later with Chandugo Ligege. Let's get into the Africa Roundup now, looking back at some stories that have made headlines to catch you up on some of those that you might have missed, and also just looking forward in terms of what we would get updates coming into this new week on. Medical charity Doctors Without Borders has described a deadly attack on one of its hospitals in South Sudan as horrific. The bombing, carried out by helicopter gunships, reportedly killed at least 7 people and wounded 20 others. The BBC's Will Ross says there are concerns that the feud between President Salva Kiir and Vice President Riek Machar could lead to an all-out war.
you can say that the 2018 peace deal that ended a civil war in South Sudan has basically collapsed. You're talking about many, many thousands of people who are armed, and there's just a fear of this going back to a full-blown civil war, and the last one, left more than 2 million displaced and 400,000 people dead.
South Africa's Defence Minister Angie Motshekga has clarified that the funding for the South African National Defence Force deployment in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC, was provided by the Southern African Development Community, or SADC. Speaking to the media in Pretoria, Motshekga stressed that the army is part of a border regional initiative under the SADC mission and not acting on behalf of South Africa alone. She noted that both SADC and the East African Community, the EAC, jointly decided to withdraw their troops as part of renewed efforts to secure peace in the DRC. South Africa, she added, has contributed to the mission as a member of the regional bloc.
The financing of SAMI-DRC comes from the 16 countries that make SADC. From there, when they've worked out the figures, they'll tell us what is supposed to be our contribution as a country based on the 16 countries' contributions, which are determined with a different formula. So we'll still get our figure from the SADC Secretariat.
The publishing of the National Register for Sex Offenders in South Africa has been put on pause until amendments have been made to the necessary legislation. The country's Minister for Justice and Constitutional Development, Mamuloko Kubai, explained in a parliamentary reply that certain processes still need to be followed before that list can be made public. The register is used by government as a tool as an attempt to safeguard children and vulnerable persons against sexual assault. A conviction is key to getting a perpetrator's name onto the National Register for Sex Offenders. Director of the Teddy Bear Foundation, Dr. Shahida Omar, says despite the register not having worked optimally for many years, it remains a vital mechanism to clamp down on levels of sexual assault against children.
It is extremely important in order to safeguard and protect children, to ensure that children will not be subjected to sexual violence or any form of violations. And of course, to have these people, once they've been convicted on the sex offender register, it is something that has been a huge challenge for many years now, because many offenders are not convicted, and offenders that have been convicted are still not on the sex offender register.
And finally, as the world marked World Press Freedom Day this past weekend, the Secretary-General of the United Nations has called for journalists everywhere to be able to report freely without fear or favour. However, he has acknowledged that this was becoming increasingly more difficult and dangerous each year. Antonio Guterres referred to free and independent journalism as an essential public good, the backbone of accountability, just equity and human rights.
Je, una jambo lolote akilini mwako? Je, una shauku kuhusu masuala muhimu? Na je, una maoni ambayo unataka yasikike? Kweli, hili jukwaa ni la kwako. Piga simu au tuandikie kwenda WhatsApp namba alama ya kujumulisha 2760552594 na tutakupigia simu.
Mtangazaji wa habari zetu za Afrika Kusini mjini Johannesburg.
Hivyo unaweza kuwa mshirika kwenye matangazo yetu. Sio mazungumzo tu, ni fursa yako ya kuchangia maoni yako na kushirikiana na jumuiya ya wasikilizaji wanaotamani mtazamo wako. Tufuate kwenye mitandao ya kijamii. Tembelea tovuti yetu www.channelafrica.co.za na uwe tayari kushiriki na kuchangia maoni yako kwenye Channel Africa. Channel Africa, mtazamo wa Kiafrika.
Download the SABC app and take Channel Africa with you everywhere you go.
If you've just joined us, this is Africa Rise and Shine on this new day, Monday, and a new week. It's the 5th of May. Let's get a roundup then and look at some of the stories making headlines on the African continent and beyond and unpack these with Channel Africa analyst Mighty Jamie. Good morning, Mighty. How are you this morning?
Good morning to you and good morning to the listeners.
Let's start in Kenya, and we're going to unpack this even further in the next hour of Africa Rise and Shine. The Kenyan government, they blocked the public screening of a BBC documentary investigating the military's role in the killing of protesters. The documentary has currently been viewed over 5 million times, and government-aligned MPs or members of parliament are accusing the BBC of inciting instability, and they're calling for the broadcaster to be banned from operating in Kenya. What are your thoughts on this documentary, first of all, and then the reaction we've had from members of parliament in Kenya?
Well, I did watch the documentary, and I think it was an excellent piece of journalism, data journalism, use of technology to actually try to pinpoint and identify the soldiers and the members of the police who were issuing instructions and the people who were killing civilians as they were protesting. So if you haven't watched this, and I recommend that you watch it because it's an excellent piece.
Let me check.
And it seems it's young journalists. There's 4 young black journalists who put this together. And this being a march that was staged or led at the forefront by young people. What are your connections in terms of that?
Well, I mean, just to finish that thought about the quality of journalism is that it was excellent, and we must commend those journalists for putting this particular set of footage together. I mean, they went through meticulously thousands of videos, thousands of live streams, went through thousands of photos. And, I studied law, and looking at the quality of work that they presented, you could use that to prosecute in a court case. So now, in terms of the conduct of the officials, the conduct of the police and the army, which is what is really being controversial here, is that the Kenyan Defense Forces were identified to be part of the protests. It was a big issue. So after the protest last year, young people got onto the streets after the proposal of the finance bill and the passing of the finance bill, or as the finance bill was being passed, rather, young people were protesting and they were approaching parliament to really air their discontent about this finance bill in a country where there are high levels of corruption, high levels of government graft. And I think it was a legitimate protest. I did speak to Kenyans last year who were part of the protest. It was something that wasn't beyond the free speech rights of civilians, beyond the protest rights of civilians. Obviously, when you have a large-scale protest like this, there are some elements who will be in the protest, who will, for instance, there was a burning of a police bus. You will see that in the footage. Those things do happen when protests reach a critical mass. It was over 100,000 people protesting. That being said, the protest was legitimate. What was not legitimate, however, was the killing of 65 people, the disappearance of 89 others, who still up until now have not been accounted for. So it's something that has really occupied the Kenyan imagination. And what has really been worrying in this particular instance is that the government has blocked the documentary from being screened in public cinemas. The Kenyan authorities actually rushed to block a public screening which was supposed to be at the Unseen Nairobi Cinema. And that was something I think that the public has really taken offense to. So on YouTube, Kenyans are actually organizing to make the whole documentary, which is about 37 minutes, a commercial on public television. So they want to buy commercial space and use it as a form of advertising and pay for that so that the people of Kenya can see. Because 5 million views is a lot, and I'm sure it's growing. But you still want people who don't have TVs to be able, not TVs, but internet rather, to be able to see what was done.
The journalists themselves who put this project together are Kenyan by background. So what do you make of MPs or members of parliament accusing the entire BBC of inciting instability? This is their country, these journalists. Why would they want to do that?
Well, in the first instance, I think that the broad rejection by pro-government MPs of the documentary is just a cover-up. It's an attempt to spin the story and to find, distractions. But in the main, that criticism is invalid. You're correct to say that, the journalists who made the content were actually Kenyan, but one of them in particular was actually carrying the dead bodies as they were being shot. So one of the journalists who was participating in the production of this, he will talk about this guy was shot down who was wearing, one of the guys had come out of a butchery where he had worked. He was protesting peacefully. He was one of the, I think, if not the first or second people to be shot by a police officer, shot dead within a range where the police should have been using rubber bullets actually, but they were using live ammunition. So he was actually physically carrying those bodies out of the line of fire. The reason why he was doing that at the time, he didn't realize some of the people had been killed. They were actually trying to perform first aid. And those kind of eyewitness testimonies change the quality of content being produced, not only from that of journalists, but these are journalists now who have become part of the story. Because if you were the first responder, if you were somebody who was actually lifting bodies out of the crowd as they were being shot by the police, you cannot be discredited. The criticism that is a little bit valid, although I don't think it's something that should be focused on as much, is that the Kenyan authorities and the politicians are saying, well, people were burning the bus. Why didn't they show us that footage? People, one guy I think I saw, which I thought was a bit hilarious in the context of the macabre content. There was a gentleman I saw coming out of parliament carrying a flat screen TV. And I thought, yeah, well, they could have told stories about some of these protesters as well. But when you do the way up, when 65 people have been killed by the army, by the police in a peaceful protest, the focus of journalists can't be who carried a flat screen outside. The focus of journalists has to be who killed the 65 people, because in constitutional democracies where the Bill of Rights, and most of these countries like Kenya do have a Bill of Rights, life is sacrosanct, and when life has been violated and taken away, it's imperative for the journalists to focus on that. They can't be focusing on who took a flat screen TV or which elements were involved in the burning of the bus. Those things are secondary, and I don't think that those criticisms are fair as a result of that. Even if it was made by foreign journalists, the important thing is to check whether the facts are accurate, whether all of the evidence has been presented. And as I say to you, the quality of journalism, they are presenting the footage of the officials who committed the murders. They are presenting that in real time and showing you who participated in those acts of, use of force and abuse of power. Even if it was made by Russia today, it would still be a legitimate documentary. The Kenyan government officials and the politicians protesting this are not justified in doing so.
Coming out of commemorations of World Press Freedom Day this past weekend, it's quite interesting to make that connection, I guess, for the call for the BBC to be banned from operating in Kenya and how that is going to make that country look when it comes to press freedom. But let's leave that one there and go to Gabon now. Bryce Oligui Nguema, who led a coup in Gabon, ending decades of Bongo family rule and swept the election last month. We spoke about his weeping win of 95%, 94 point something. We wrap it to 95% of the vote. He's been sworn in as the country's president. What are your thoughts on the challenges that he now faces moving forward?
He has a lot to prove, right? He has a lot to prove. In the positive column, people will give him credit for removing the Bongo family from power. He was former head of the Republican Guard, and the Bongo family had been basically running the country for 56 years. So people will give him a lot of honeymoon period and a benefit of the doubt, so to speak, because of that accomplishment. I mean, that was nearly 2 years ago now. And that honeymoon, I think, will reach an end at some point. But the challenges that he is facing are significant, and they're worth pointing out, because this is how we ought to measure his performances. Unemployment right now is at 20%. The poverty rate affects a third of the population. They are living in extreme poverty. Most of the poor are urban. Rural poverty as well does exist, and it's compounded by low access to basic services, as you can imagine. There are major infrastructural, institutional, and human capital gaps which continue to remain. And also right now, the country has been going through what South Africa was going through, which are frequent power cuts, the load shedding question, the blackouts, whatever you want to call them. Those are some of the things that he will have to face. So The youth dependency ratio also is very high at over 70%. So you have a small adult population which has to take care of a lot of people who are in primary school and high school. So dealing with that unemployment issue is going to be a big thing. Now, in the negative or in the question mark column, even though I did just recently praise him, it's for saying remove the Bongo family. I mean, it's important for us to recognize that he is also part of the Bongo family, because those people are his cousins. So it's going to be important to see how he navigates the geopolitical dynamics and also how he creates alliances across the African continent and how he presents at that level and his commitments to democracy and human rights. Because, that 95% number, that 94% number is not typical of, free nations. It's typical of dictatorships and people who are basically trying to remain in control by dictatorial tendencies. So we'll have to see what happens in that respect. But it looks as if right now the mood in Gabon was very jovial. The people are very supportive of him. He's still very much in a grace period. I think, we saw also the Burkina Faso, dictator there, or what can we call him, revolutionary freedom fighter, Traore there. And he also got a large round of applause from the crowd, showing that, people in Africa are really receptive to his positioning, his rhetoric, and some of his moves. But I think even question marks remain there, but it's a story for another day. So major challenges, we'll have to see how they deal with them going forward. But unemployment, those blackouts, those are going to be some of the things that people are looking at.
Brice Ngwema also, as part of his constitutional reforms that he was calling for, was that the position of Prime Minister be removed. How likely are we to see that happening?
Yeah, it may happen. He's in charge. We don't typically have to look at titles when we're looking at these types of figures, right? Because when you are coming from the army and you have the guns or the support of the guns, basically you can get whatever you want to happen. But typically people who call for the removal of prime minister positions and the strengthening of presidential powers, those are the kind of people I have concerns about, because they're trying to, basically make sure that they are president for life. But as I said, we're going to give him benefit of the doubt. We have to see what happens. But I do have my concerns and reservations when people start these types of conversations from the upfront. But having said that, we're still early on into this period. And the country has also been downgraded by Fitch, the ratings agency, which had some concerns about how they're going to fund all of these infrastructure projects that they've been speaking about. So it's a mixed bag. For me. I think just to give him the room to see what he's going to do while remaining skeptical about some of the decisions that are being made, which I think don't show that there's a commitment to democracy and, to the upholding of human rights. The kind of leaders who come in with these kind of behaviors I think those are red flags for me.
Let's go to Sudan now. The Sudanese paramilitaries on Sunday struck Port Sudan on the Red Sea coast. That's what the army says. In the first attack on the seat of the army-aligned government in the country's 2-year war, the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, targeted Osman Dinna Air Base, which is a goods warehouse, and some civilian facilities in the city of Port Sudan with suicide drones, and that's according to an army spokesman, Nabil Abdullah. What are your reflections on these latest developments in Sudan?
Yeah, when I read this story and I saw the story, I was concerned because, it just seems as if there's no end in sight at this particular point. At some points we'll hear that the army has taken back some ground, and at other points we'll hear that, listen, the Rapid Support Forces have taken back some ground. And the backdrop of all of this is these two entities, the army and the Rapid Support Forces, are not the choice of the civilians. This is a civil war between two rival military factions, and they seem to be getting a lot of resources and a lot of support, which we need to also question. Where is that support coming from? We've heard of the UAE being involved in supporting, the Rapid Support Forces, which are led by Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, who was implicated in a lot of the atrocities which occurred in Darfur. So there are questions which need to be asked now about these suicide drones. Where are they getting them from? Are these American-made? What is the source of this technology? Is it coming from Russia? Because drones of this nature, they're not the normal ones that you and I would buy just to, look at scenery and go on runs with. This is very complex equipment, and we need an understanding of the source of all of this. The troubling issue is that the African Union, just beyond their depth in dealing with this issue and keeping this issue on the global profile. And people in Sudan keep speaking about how they have been forgotten in terms of the great conflicts which are currently happening. Ukraine occupying a lot of the public imagination. We also know Gaza occupies a lot of the public imagination. And people are justified to care about Ukraine, and they're justified to care about, Gaza. But if you were to think that over 20,000 people have been killed in Sudan, millions have been displaced, and we know that there's a history of genocide in Sudan, surely that issue should be occupying the African imagination at the top level, and we should be talking about it on a daily basis. But instead, you'll find that even African activists, scholars, and thinkers speak more about Gaza and Ukraine than they do about Sudan. And some of them don't even know the issues and the background of Sudan, which is worrying and troubling. I'm happy we talk about it, but it's not enough, as we can see just basically, even on social media. Sudan is not a number one trending topic on a daily basis.
Well, we're going to be unpacking more on Sudan in the next hour, but looking at the humanitarian crisis in terms of food insecurity there. Let's leave it on that one for now, Mighty, for this Monday. Thanks again for making time. Your plans for the rest of the week?
Well, I'm just going to be following all of these stories and trying to see what's happening, and trying to finish my UNICEF master. One thing at a time. One
thing at a time. Thanks again so much for joining us. That is Channel Africa analyst Mighty Jamie. It's 6:30 Central African time now. Let's say good morning again to Onele Nzinzi for news headlines.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. The International Court of Justice will later today deliver its order on Sudan's request for provisional measures against the United Arab Emirates. Sudan has accused the Gulf state of complicity in the commission of genocide in Darfur for backing the paramilitary rapid support forces that are fighting against the Sudanese armed forces. South African National Defence Force Chief General Rudzani Mapanywa says an agreement was reached with the M23 rebels in the Eastern DRC that all troops and the equipment will be withdrawn unconditionally. And Russia has closed one of Moscow's main airports after a Ukrainian drone attack aimed at the capital. No injuries or damages have been reported, but emergency services are working at the scene. Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Nzinzi.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Onele, thanks very much indeed. As she says, she'll be back at the top of the hour with a full bulletin for you. Right now, though, it's a first look at the sport. And after a weekend, there's usually so much sport to report on. And we say good morning to Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Very good morning from the sports desk. We'll start here. So Sierra Leone has become the first team to qualify for the Africa Cup of Nations AFCON Under-20 quarterfinals. This after registering their second win in Group B, beating Tanzania 1-0 at the Suez Canal Stadium over the weekend. Now, the West Africans have now moved to 7 points after 3 games and remain unbeaten in this year's tournament with only 1 game remaining in the group. The debutants play Amajita on Tuesday in their next game, and the head coach of the side, Mohamed Lamine Kamara, was happy to see his team collecting maximum points once again.
We are learning tonight, and we keep learning every day. We knew this match was going to be a very tough one for us because Tanzania, we give everything they have because they lose their first match. And so all we wanted was just to come here today and win. And that will almost 99% chance of qualifying us to the next round.
On to Formula One news now. McLaren's Oscar Piastri won for a fourth time in about 6 races this year as he beat teammate Lando Norris in an action-packed Miami Grand Prix last night. Now, both McLaren drivers fought intense battles with early leader Max Verstappen's Red Bull as they moved up to the front of the field. Piastri, who started fourth, drove a race of clinical excellence to pass both Mercedes' Kimi Antonelli and then Verstappen to assume the lead before managing his gap to his pursuers to the end. This is what he had to say after his fourth win this season.
Felt like we nailed everything we could have from a car point of view. I had to be patient at the start. You know, there was a lot going on, a lot of big manoeuvres being put on out on track, and I just had to bide my time and pick my moment properly. And eventually that came, and then I knew once I got ahead of Max that I had to try and build a gap because the pace was much stronger than when I was behind him.
On to athletics news now. Ethiopians Taluhan Negesu won the Belfast Marathon in a new record of about 2 hours, 13 minutes and 37 seconds after dominating the race. Now, the Ethiopian winning time cut 4 seconds off the previous race that was set by his compatriot Negewo Ararisa back in 2012. Now, Negesu was already well ahead of the field by the end of the first mile, as he only's company was a couple of early marathon relay competitors. Now, the previous event record was about 2 hours, 13 minutes and 41 seconds, set 13 years ago by his compatriot Ararisa, and didn't look under threat as Negesu reached the halfway mark in 1 hour, 8 minutes and 40 seconds. Meanwhile, Kenya's Millicent Kibet won the women's race in a time of 2 hours, 38 minutes and 30 seconds, which was more than 3 minutes outside of the record set by another Kenyan, Beatrice Kikema, last year in 2024. Onto this story now. Proteas fast bowling spearhead Kagiso Rabada has been suspended after a recreational drug was found in his system by the South African Institute for Drug-Free Sport. Now, Rabada issued a statement on Saturday via the South African Cricket Association expressing that he was deeply sorry for what happened, but he did not deny using a recreational drug in his statement. Rabada returned to South Africa from the Indian Premier League just last month, having played only 2 matches for the Gujarat Titans. The Titans said in a statement at the time that Rabada was returning home for a significant personal matter. It has now been established that Rabada's positive drug test was the reason for his return to the country, with a representative at the South African Drug-Free Sport confirming that the test was done in South Africa, presumably before he had left for India for the IPL. Now, SADS will issue a statement later on today with more details about the adverse finding. Meanwhile, in his statement, Rabada apologized to all those who he let down, and also said he will never take the privilege of playing cricket for granted. And finally, in tennis news, world number 1 Aryna Sabalenka said her sensational form this year is like a dream. This after defeating Coco Gauff 6-3 and 7-6 on Saturday to win her third Madrid Open title. Last year's runner-up cruised past the American, ranked 4th in the first set before digging deep in the second to win a tie-break sealing victory as Gauff double faulted. Sabalenka recorded her 4 leading 31st victory this season on the Madrid clay, adding the WTA 1000 trophy to titles in Brisbane as well as Miami. It was the 6th final she had reached this year and the 37th of her career, the 4th in 5 years at Madrid. Last year, Sabalenka was beaten by Iga Swiatek in the showpiece, whom Gauff thrashed in the semi-finals last Thursday. The Pole is struggling for form, which gives Sabalenka little competition for the world number 1 spot and also makes her the leading contender for the French Open, the side of Swiatek's last title almost a year ago. That's a wrap from the sports desk at the Sawa. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, simply send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or give us a call on +27 11714 4459. For Channel Africa Sport, I am Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Você é fluente em português? É apaixonado por rádio e quer trabalhar na África do Sul? Você tem documentos que o qualificam para trabalhar na África do Sul? Nesse caso, podemos ter uma oportunidade para você trabalhar no Canal África. Envie seu currículo e demonstração para Canal África at newsroom@channelafrica.co.za. Lembre-se, se você não receber alguma resposta nossa em 14 dias, isso significa que você não foi selecionado. Canal África, a perspectiva africana.
Mornings made better with Peter and Asanda on Rise and Shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 Central African Time on Channel Africa.
Let's find out now what's happening in the world of business. Here's Chandu Kolikeke with your details.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thank you, Asanda, and good morning. Egypt's Suez Canal Economic Zone signed a 50-year concession deal with the United Arab Emirates Abu Dhabi Ports Group to set up a 20 square kilometer logistics and industrial zone east of Port Said. AD Ports has committed $120 million for initial development and feasibility studies. Phase, which covers an area of 2.8 square kilometers to be developed over the 3 years. According to the cabinet statement, the zone will include a 1.5 kilometer quay, potentially featuring a multi-purpose cargo terminal. SpaceX CEO Elon Musk says that the company's satellite system Starlink is now available in Congo. On Friday, the Democratic Republic of Congo said that it had become the latest African country to grant a license to Starlink, reversing an earlier ban. In March last year, the Congolese government said in March 2024 that the use of Starlink was banned, with military officials warning that it could be used by rebel groups including Rwandan-backed M23, which has seized more territory than ever before in the east of the country this year. According to the International Telecommunication Union, war-torn Congo has low connectivity, with just around 30% of the population using the internet as of 2023. South Africa's gold fields will acquire Gold Road resources in a sweetened deal valuing the Australian miners' equity at $2.39 billion as sky-high billion prices drive a wave of tie-ups. Gold Road's shares rallied as much as 12% on the offer, which was pitched at a 14.5% premium to the company's last closing price. The buyout will allow Gold Fields to consolidate ownership over the low-cost, long-life Gruyere gold mine in Western Australia, which it operates under a joint venture with Gold Road. It is the third notable deal in 6 months in the sector that is one of the hottest spots globally for mergers and acquisitions, as rising geopolitical uncertainties power a record rally in the yellow metal. U.S. President Donald Trump says he plans to impose a 100% tariff on films produced abroad, claiming it will help save the industry from what he called a very fast death. He accused other countries of luring film crews with tax breaks. The move comes weeks after China said it would cut back on the number of U.S. films allowed there. The BBC's Jake Kwon has the details.
Filmmaking is the latest industry which Donald Trump is targeting with tariffs to try to bring jobs back into the U.S. He said the business was dying a very fast death. Speaking to reporters by the Marine One helicopter, he blamed the loss of U.S. movie production on other countries offering financial incentives. The U.S. film industry has been declining for years, badly hit by the pandemic, the growing popularity of streaming services, and the end of DVD sales. Although it isn't clear how these tariffs would be applied.
American billionaire Warren Buffett has announced he'll retire as chief executive of Berkshire Hathaway at the end of the year. The 94-year-old is regarded as one of the world's most influential investors. He will hand over the reins to his chosen successor, Greg Abel. He made the announcement to investors at a meeting in Omaha, which was broadcast on the American news channel CNBC.
The time has arrived where Greg should become the chief executive officer of the company at year end. We'll go forward with that operation and I will play with a Ouija board or whatever, and that comes out in terms of doing things. But I have no intention of selling one share of Berkshire Hathaway. It'll get given away gradually.
$1 in Nigeria is at 1,000 naira 603, in Botswana 13 pula 50. Kenya, the dollar is at 128 shilling 289, Zambia 27 kwacha 78. BRICS countries, $1 in Brazil is at 5 real 65, Russia 82 rubles 57, India 84 rupees 57, China 71 21, South Africa $1 is at 18 rand 35. $1 is at 75 pence to the British pound and 88 to the euro. Commodities, gold is at $3,257, platinum at $957 per ounce, the price of Brent crude oil at $59.10 a barrel. That's all for now. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or you can call us on +27 11 For Channel Africa Business, I am Chandruko Ligege.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective. G20 in Africa, exclusive to Channel Africa.
Right, now it's time for our G20 fact of the morning. Did you know that South Africa will continue to use the G20 as a premier forum for economic and financial cooperation, bringing together developed and developing countries and emerging markets to find solutions to global challenges? Now, during the 2024 State of the Nation address, President Cyril Ramaphosa said that South Africa will continue to put Africa's development at the top of the agenda when the country hosts the G20 summit a little bit later this year. And that is our G20 fact for the morning.
G20 in Africa, exclusive to Channel Africa, championing Africa through solidarity, equality, and sustainability.
45 minutes past 6 Central African time. Let's go to more on the G20, where the Empower Alliance was launched last week at a gathering held in Johannesburg, South Africa. This comes ahead of the G20 summit to be held in the Southern African country later this year. Launched under the theme Uhuru, Women Building Sustainable Income and Financial Independence, the initiative is focused on promoting the active participation of women in decision-making and management within the private business sector, particularly within G20 countries. Tutongo Beni compiled this report.
One of South Africa's commercial banks, Absa Group, hosted the launch of the G20 Empower Alliance event in Johannesburg, South Africa. The alliance is an initiative focused on promoting the active participation of women in decision-making and management within the private business sector, particularly within G20 countries. The launch announced the commencement of working groups, which are set to start forming this month. The event was attended by Eswatini's Minister of Information Communications Technology, Savannah Mazia. Addressing the women at the launch, Mazia says hosting the G20 in South Africa is a great opportunity for women.
Having the opportunity of G20 is amazing because even though it's happening in South Africa, it is a benefit for all of us. We must all use it as a position to really ensure that we take our space, not ask for it, not negotiate it, not talk about it.
Representing South Africa's government, Deputy Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Anna Moraike, sent her message of support via video through a representative of the department, Salome Baloyi. She says South Africa's G20 presidency is also for the continent and further emphasized the significance of the alliance uniting the public and private sector.
We definitely call it a continental G20 presidency because of the importance that we allude towards our continent and the work that we do as South Africa. Today marks a significant milestone in our collective journey to unlock full economic and leadership potential of women globally. Under the G20 presidency theme, which we are all aware of by now, is solidarity, equality, and sustainability. South Africa is very proud to extend support this vital platform that I'm speaking on, the G20 Empower Alliance, which continues to unite public and private sector actors around a shared commitment to advancing women's economic representation and also leadership.
South African businesswoman, author, chancellor at the University of the Witwatersrand, and the founding chairman of the Mbekani Group, Dr. Judy Dlamini, was also part of the speaker lineup at this event. Dlamini shared her experience in a position as chancellor and how she has found a gap to address the previously disadvantaged women in academia.
I found a gap, Colleen, and what was that gap? It was transformation that is devoid of an intersectional lens, right? We find it easy to use a blanket approach when it comes to disadvantage of a people. And yet, we know that there are those that are most marginalized because of the social identities that they have. So, FAL, Female Academic Leaders Fellowship,
The other working groups that were represented at this event included the W20 or Women 20, which is an official engagement group of the G20 dedicated to gender equality and women's economic empowerment. Professor Nania Bola Mula, co-chair at W20, also highlighted the significance of working together in empowering women.
I think that W20 and G20 Empower really should work together. We can't do this on our own. Yeah. We definitely can't do this on our own. So we do have perhaps slightly different mandates and missions, but there is significant overlap. So every time I've heard Florence, and we've become quite close because we've been on a lot of platforms since December, Florence emphasizes that we have B20, which is business, private sector. We have G20 Empower, and then we have Women 20. And G20 Empower, to a large extent, should be the bridge between business and women.
G20 Empower endeavors to be the most inclusive and action-driven alliance among business and governments for accelerating women's leadership and empowerment across G20 countries. For Channel Africa News, I am Tutongo Bene in Johannesburg.
G20 in Africa, exclusive to Channel Africa, championing Africa through solidarity, equality, and sustainability. Get the news, music, and lifestyle of Africa on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
South Africa's Minister for Defence and Military Veterans, Angie Motshekga, has confirmed the phased withdrawal of the South African National Defence Force from the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, who formed part of the SAMI DRC peace mission there. Now, briefing the media in Pretoria on Sunday, the minister outlined the outcomes of the recent DRC summit of heads of state and government held on March the 13th this year, which led to the decision to transition from military intervention to political and diplomatic solutions. Channel Africa reporter Michael Mbewe has the story.
The regional bloc mission was deployed to the Eastern DRC in December 2023 with a 12-month mandate, later extended by a further year before calling a halt to operations in the wake of fatality casualty field January, where South Africa lost 14 soldiers. Speaking during the media briefing in Pretoria on Sunday, Minister of Defence and Military Veterans Angie Motshekga highlighted the progress made over the past 4 months in restoring peace in the eastern provinces of the DRC.
Over the past 4 months, the region has witnessed renewed momentum towards peace and stability in the eastern provinces of the DRC, and these political and diplomatic engagements have progressed with great momentum and led to the outcomes of the recent SAMI DRC summit of heads of state and government, which was held on the 13th of March 2025. And the outcome of these meetings has led to a decision for the termination of the mission and the withdrawal to allow political and diplomatic interventions to to resolve the security situation in the Eastern DRC, involving all states and non-state role players.
Motshekga says the decision to withdraw was made following consultations with contributing regional partners, which will be in phases for safe return.
So it is on this basis that the Summit DRC, in consultation with troop contributing countries, resolved to initiate a phased withdrawal of its forces, including those of the South African National Defence Force. And the withdrawal of the South African National Defence Force from the Eastern DRC marks a very important new chapter in our regional peacekeeping efforts. And this withdrawal is a structured process designed to ensure that safe return of both our troops and our equipment is not compromised. So all logistical support will continue during this phase.
She also said significant bilateral engagements between regional actors contributed to the peace deal between DRC government and M23 rebels.
Significant bilaterals, multilateral meetings took place between the DRC government and the regional actors, culminating in a peace agreement signed between the government of the DRC and the representatives of M23 movement. And this agreement brokered with the support of South African Development Committee SADC, the African Union and East Africa Community include commitments to cease hostilities, reintegrate former combatants and protect civilians.
Motshekga emphasized South Africa's assurance of actively continuing being involved diplomatically on the DRC conflict through the AU's Agenda 2063 on peace and paid homage to other contributing nations.
South Africa remains committed to a peaceful state, stable and a prosperous DRC. Our diplomatic developments and humanitarian engagements will continue. As we transit out of the active combat deployment, we reinforce our commitment to African-led solutions and the values of the African Union Agenda 2063. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the counterparts of the Summit DRC, the troops contributing countries, the Ministers of Defense of the United Republic of Tanzania, and the Minister of Defense of the Republic of Malawi for their collective efforts and contributions to this difficult mission where all of us lost soldiers in the battle.
SANDF Head of Operations for Summit DRC, Lieutenant General Spiwe Sangwen, explains some of the logistical complexities and challenges they are facing.
In the ops environment, we classify Goma as the red zone and then Tanzania as a green zone. So first element that moved on the 29th and arrived from Goma and arrived in URT, which is the green zone, on the 30th of April. I'm bringing this just so that all of us must understand our plans and estimates was that the distance from Goma to URT or to Tanzania territory is very short. According to we expected that a movement will be completed in one day. However, the roads that side and vehicles breaking down, they had to take 2 days from the 29th until the 30th at the assembly area.
He says some troops and equipment will travel by sea. However, it is not known when they may arrive in South Africa.
When all elements are now in the green zone, will be for South Africa particularly, we'll have some which will move by sea, meaning at the port of Dar es Salaam, which will be much more quicker. The prime mission equipment to be put on board a vessel. Well, we all know we're not sure when then those vessels will be able to arrive in RSA.
Michael Mbewe, Channel Africa News, Johannesburg.
Your morning companion with the stories that matter. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
All right, it is a little bit before the top of the hour, and just before we go there, today actually is a significant day in history. 1963, although the Organization of African Unity, which eventually became known as the AU, was established on May the 25th, it was actually on this day that the first meetings took place. And in fact, African leaders had already arrived in Addis Ababa and were being hosted by Emperor Haile Selassie at the time. And they started engaging in discussions that would lead to the formation on the 25th of May of the African Organization of African Unity. And so it's a significant day for the history of this continent.
And we have a chat coming up on Africa Month in the next hour.
There you go.
There we go. That links nicely with that. We've just joined us. Well, this is Rise and Shine here on Channel Africa. Remember, you can find us on our social media platforms, on X, on Instagram, on TikTok. Our handles there are at Channel Africa 1. And on Facebook, we are Channel Africa. We'd love to hear from you and maybe your questions as well about our show.
Yes, indeed. And also would love to hear what your thoughts are about Channel Africa if you've been listening over the decades, because we are 59.
59 years old.
Wow. If you've been listening over the decades, how useful has it been for you? What I find is often some countries, the media is so captured by the state that they have to listen to other radio stations beyond their countries for news about what's happening at home. And we hope that we've been able to serve you in some respect in that way and continue to serve and give you the news that you deserve. All right, coming up in this hour, what do we have, Asanda Beda?
We're going to Gabon this hour. Former Gabonese Army General Brice Clotaire Oligui Nguema, who's officially been sworn in as Gabon's president. If you were listening in the previous hour, we spoke about that with Channel Africa analyst Mighty Jamie. So we go deeper into that chat, and also going to Sudan, where the World Food Programme has expressed fears of food insecurity. This is after developments in Sudan, including the killing of 300 people by the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. So we'll be speaking to Head of Communications at the World Food Programme Day in Sudan, Lenny Kinsley.
All right, all of that and more coming up after the news, as we say good morning once again to Onele Nsinsi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. The International Court of Justice will later today deliver its order on Sudan's request for provisional measures against the United Arab Emirates. Sudan has accused the Gulf state of complicity in the commission of genocide in Darfur for backing the paramilitary rapid support forces that are fighting against the Sudanese armed forces. The UAE has rejected the allegations, Sean Bryce Peace reports.
The UAE denied supporting the RSF in Sudan and has described the ICJ case as political theatre and a distraction from efforts to end the war that has created one of the largest humanitarian disasters in the world. Legal experts have indicated that the case might come down to a question of jurisdiction. While a signatory to the convention, the UAE entered a reservation to Article 9, which allows countries to take each other to the ICJ to settle disputes. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights warned on Thursday that the horrors unfolding in Sudan knew no bounds, warning of war crimes. The United States determined in January that the RSF had committed genocide in Sudan.
Meanwhile, authorities say Sudan's paramilitary rapid support forces carried out a drone attack on a military airbase and facilities near Port Sudan Airport, marking the first RSF attack to reach the eastern port city. No casualties were reported. The army has responded by increasing its deployment around vital facilities in Port Sudan and closing roads leading to the presidential palace and army command. The two-year conflict has led to waves of ethnic violence and created the world's worst humanitarian crisis, with several areas experiencing famine. South African National Defence Force Chief General Rudzani Mapwanya says an agreement has been reached with the M23 rebels in the eastern DRC that all troops and their equipment will be withdrawn unconditionally. He says South Africa is not abandoning the Peace Commission in the DRC, but the withdrawal is a decision taken by the Southern African regional body SADC and the East African community to find lasting peace in the country. Pretoria has started with the phased withdrawal. The South African National Prosecuting Authority spokesperson Mthunzi Maga says it is important that a judicial commission of inquiry establish whether attempts were made to prevent the investigation or prosecution of apartheid-era crimes referred by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to the NPA. This comes as some victims' families alleged interference with the highest level of government. Maaga says if families get answers, they will find closure and justice will be served.
We're in support of it because there have been these allegations of either political interference or pressure exerted on certain individuals within the prosecutorial component in the criminal justice system. So I think it's only fair that the families of the victims of the apartheid-era crimes who have a direct and substantial interest in the resolution or finalization of this matter so that they can have some closure, get to have answers through that commission of inquiry.
Lastly, Russia has closed one of Moscow's main airports after a Ukrainian drone attack aimed in the capital. The city's mayor said air defense forces had intercepted 4 drones heading to Moscow. No injuries or damages have been reported, but emergency services are working at the scene. Now, for any news stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us at +27 11 714 4459. Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Ntsinzi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
And coming up in your sports news, South Africa win the HSBC Sevens World Championship title in Los Angeles. And McLaren dominate as Oscar Piastri completes a hat-trick of wins in Miami. Details of these and other stories at the bottom of the hour.
Start your day informed, inspired, and entertained. Asanda and Peter bring you Rise and Shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time.
Right, the withdrawal process of the SADC mission from the Eastern DRC has commenced. South Africa's Defence and Military Veterans Minister, Angie Motshekga, alongside South African National Defence Force generals, told a media briefing in the capital Pretoria yesterday that the movement on road from Goma via Rwanda to Tanzania has started. In March, SADC leaders held a virtual meeting where they decided to withdraw the troops to allow the warring parties to have an inclusive dialogue. According to the Defence Forces plan, most of the personnel will be in South Africa by the end of May. Ditaba Tsotetsi filed this report.
The withdrawal of the South African National Defence Force from the Eastern DRC marks a very important new chapter in our regional peacekeeping efforts. This withdrawal is a structured process designed to ensure that safe return of both our troops and our equipment is not compromised. So all logistical support will continue during this phase.
An assurance from the South African Defence and Military Veterans Minister, Angie Motshekga, that they are working hard to bring back SANDF members who are part of the SADC mission in the DRC. The movement of both logistics and personnel will be by road from Eastern DRC via Rwanda to Tanzania. SANDF Chief Ruzani Mapanywa elaborates.
This withdrawal is not an accidental withdrawal, and withdrawal is not a sign of weakness. Withdrawal is a persuasion of the political effort to see that there is peace and stability in the Eastern DRC, and therefore we are withdrawing with that pride to say there is an element of peace because M23 committed to the cessation of hostilities. DRC had to sign also an undertaking with M23.
Lieutenant General Sipue Sangweni of the SANDF Joint Operations explains the processes of bringing back the troops.
The mode of movement, when all elements are now in the green zone, will be for South Africa particularly, we'll have some which will move by sea, meaning at the port of Dar es Salaam, which will be much more quicker. The prime mission equipment to be put on board a vessel. Well, we all know we're not sure when then those vessels will be able to arrive in RSA.
SANDF Chief Mapanyo says that this is a delicate process and they are collaborating with a number of countries.
The rest of South Africans, the rest of SADC members will move out of Sake and Goma, and they will disperse from the assembly area which is in Tanzania.
Recently, DRC and Rwandan foreign affairs ministers committed to come up with a draft peace deal and refrain from providing military support to armed groups. U.S. State Secretary Marco Rubio oversaw the pact signing ceremony. Motshekga says Pretoria will continue to support the peace initiative in Congo.
The current space we find ourselves has been the efforts of AU. So AU came in, it's the efforts also of East African Community and SADC. But also if you look at that panel that is now negotiating peace, it's really a broader panel. It's not SADC only, it's not East African Community only, but it's different countries also which contributed towards the peace negotiating team. So I do believe that there's still ongoing commitment to getting African solutions, African problems being solved locally. So I don't doubt that commitment.
The SANDF says that the withdrawal of SAMI DRC is a clear directive from SADC leaders to allow political and diplomatic intervention to ensure long-lasting peace in Congo. I'm Dida Batsotezi, SABC News.
Your morning companion with the stories that matter. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
Former Gabonese Army General Brice Clotaire Oligui Nguema was formally sworn in as Gabon's president on Saturday, marking the end of a 19-month transitional period under military rule as the country returns to constitutional governance. Nguema's first rise to power was in August 2023 when he led a coup that toppled Ali Bongo Ondimba, ending the Bongo family's 56-year-old hold on the presidency and installing himself as head of the Committee for the Transition and Restoration of Institutions. In the country's April 12 election, the first since the coup, he secured an overwhelming mandate, winning 94.85% of the vote against 7 challengers, a result ratified by Gabon's Constitutional Court on April 25th. For more on this, we joined on the line by human rights defender and political commentator Jean Boassa. Jean, good morning to you. How are you this Monday?
Good morning, Asanda. Could be better, but we thank God we survived. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for making time for us. Take us through in terms of what led to the 2023 coup d'etat in Gabon, shortly after the announcement that incumbent President Ali Bongo.
Well, I think what led to the coup in 2023 would be a fatigue of the long-lasting rule of the Bongo dynasty. However, as I alluded to during the coup that Brigadier General Brice Oligui Nguema did, I said that was not a divorce with the Bongo family, because Oligui Nguema is none other person than a cousin to the Bongo Ali. So it is for me a continuation of the Bongo dynasty within Gabon. And that was the dissatisfaction of the mere fact that corruption through the Bongo family, but also the mismanagement of the fund in Gabon and Libreville. And we must know and remember ourselves that Gabon is a very small country with a very small population of nearly about 2.5 million at the moment. So, which normally in some other instances and elsewhere in the world, we would see normally a booming economy and the citizens of the country benefiting from what it produces. And let's remind ourselves that the GDP per inhabitant in 1960 was about $14,800, while at the moment it's stagnating between $6,000 to $7,000 per capita.
We'll come into that in terms of his plans for the economy as well. But the election saw some 920,000 voters, including more than 28,000 foreigners, take to over 3,000 polling stations. What made Ngwema victorious over his opponent, in your view, including outgoing Prime Minister Alain Claude Billy Binze, who finished a distant third with just 3% of the vote?
As I said earlier on, I do think that Ngwema is still linked to the Bongo family, in terms of bloodline. And given the fact that as we saw what happened in the IES countries, where those leaders, the Traoré, the Goïta, have cut ties with the former colonizer, what happened is that the former colonizer might have realized that what is going to happen in Central Africa, mainly Gabon, and Congo-Brazzaville, would really hamper and hinder his touch on those countries. So this was prepared in such a way that their influence will still continue in Gabon. And we could have seen that in what he has pledged recently, that there's no way he's going to cut the umbilical cord with regard to the former colonizer. And I do believe at that moment, with the network of the Bongo family, the population hasn't yet understood that this is the age of the Aquarius, and it is the time where we need to find societal progress and the evolution of humanity in such a way that instead of having 60% of unemployment in the rural area, we could transform. And that is what the former Prime Minister was campaigning for, to change the exportation of the mineral resources. We must remember that Gabon is rich in oil, manganese, timber, and palm oil. So instead of going through that era, the former Prime Minister wanted to change this, Claude Binze wanted to change this narrative of only extracting, but promoting agriculture as well as tourism. Unfortunately, it hasn't materialized, but maybe let's give him a chance for the next electoral commission. But I would like to underline something that is very important. The mere fact that there was no violence per se in this election is a proof and evidence that we are maturing in terms of electoral processes, because there's no loss of life like we would have seen somewhere else. And this need to be acknowledged and understood by our African leaders elsewhere on the continent.
Yes, let's go back to those economy plans. Then Ngwema having pledged to diversify Gabon's oil-dependent economy by developing agriculture, as you touched on. Also, he wants to develop industry and tourism while strengthening democratic institutions and addressing youth unemployment. What other issues do you think should form part of his top priorities?
Well, I think one of the issues that should form part of his priority should be the motorway. We must understand that in order to develop a country, you need to have the infrastructure, the routes, the roads that would normally be able to evacuate the agricultural products. And also what should be key and pivotal for Gabon is not to have these foreign companies ruling the countries. We must know that there are close to 80 French companies in Gabon. Why couldn't Brice Oligui at the moment change and do as the IES countries have done, so that these companies are not foreign companies? Yes, we might have some in terms of the process and the transfer of skills, but mainly if we could have African companies where our children, the generations of Africans, are also learning to transform and to process what we are producing. That could change the narrative and the solutions for Africa as a whole, and possibly having Africans dependent upon themselves rather than always waiting to have a needle from overseas, cars from overseas. How is that possible that we have all these mineral resources and then we are enabled to manufacture ourselves the goods?
Well, as you say, African solutions to African problems. 16 African heads of state also attended the inauguration ceremony. What support is he likely to enjoy in the region or the rest of Africa as we try to work together as he assumes his role?
Well, I would say 16 head of state, and some were former head of states that were there. That was the club of those that are still having a strong grip on their population and ill-treating their population and not providing the possibility to their population to also benefit from the wealth of their respective countries. And I would say, and I've said this a countless number of times, I think it is also a time where we need to overhaul the African Union, because these are the club of those that are members of the African Union and that are doing nothing. So if we overhaul the African Union, I will say, for instance, there's section 25.4 of the amendments that normally should not have allowed Brice Oligui to contest for election, but he has contested and we have approved it. Sometimes when we speak about democracy and elections, we need also to find a way where we say, okay, this has not worked for us for the past 60 years. What do we do as a model that aligns with our cultures, our traditions, and our way of thinking? And therefore, we would respect that in accordance, because now we are like in a highway where people are going, oh, democracy days, and democracy that has been manipulated and imitated through the Caucasian era, European, Americans, while we as Africans, this is our way of thinking, who must be a chief and who must rule and who must do this and that. And these are thinking which need think tank in Africa for us to see what is the right model for leadership in Africa. Otherwise, we will always continue to face the same challenges.
Let's leave it there, and thanks again for your time, Jean. Enjoy the rest of your day and starting the week off, hopefully on a better note.
Thank you very much, Asanda, and thanks to your listeners. Thank you so much.
Our pleasure. Human rights defender and political commentator Jean Bouassa speaking to us on the latest there from Gabon.
Hi there. Do you want to elevate your business and give it a voice in South Africa and Africa as a whole? Well, in that case, let Channel Africa make this a possibility. Channel Africa is willing to advertise your business for as little as 30,000 rands or $1,719.18. To get access to these great rates, send all requests to mokoenata@SABC. That's MOKOENATA@SABC. Channel Africa, the African perspective. A fresh morning, a fresh perspective. Stay tuned to Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
Right, it's time now to focus on matters Sudan. The International Court of Justice is expected to deliver its order today on Sudan's request for provisional measures against the United Arab Emirates. Sudan has accused the UAE of aiding the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces and being complicit in the alleged commission of genocide in Darfur. Meanwhile, the humanitarian crisis in Sudan continues to worsen. The World Food Programme has raised serious concerns about escalating food insecurity, compounded by the ongoing violence, donor fatigue, and extreme weather conditions. And with millions of people displaced and in need of urgent assistance, the people in Sudan and other conflict-affected regions are facing dire straits as global humanitarian funding declines. Well, to discuss the scale of the hunger crisis and the WFP's response, we're now joined by Lenny Kinsley, who's the head of communications at the World Food Programme in Sudan. Thanks so much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Lenny, maybe you can start by giving us an overview from what you're seeing, the current food security situation in Sudan, particularly in the regions that are hardest hit by conflict. What are you seeing?
So currently, Sudan is the world's worst hunger crisis. 25 million people, that's half the population, face acute hunger. That's a population the size of a country like Australia. The needs are extremely overwhelming, and famine has been confirmed in 10 areas, largely in North Darfur to the west, and then the Western Nuba Mountains. And we also have 17 other areas across the country that are at risk of famine. And what that looks like on ground is that people are resorting to extreme measures to be able to survive. Eating animal waste or what's left over from food processing, food waste, grass, leaves, really, really extreme measures. And now we're seeing a massive influx of people fleeing the capital of North Darfur, El Fasher, to Tawila and other areas close by, arriving with little or nothing and having been trapped by fighting in the besieged capital of North Darfur for months and months and months.
Wow, that sounds horrific. And we hear that 300 people were recently killed by RSF. How has this conflict affected your ability to access people in need and help?
So access has been quite a challenge over the last 2 years since the conflict started. But in recent months, we've really been able to ramp up assistance, especially to those most affected. Now in Tawila, where hundreds of thousands of people have fled, we are distributing assistance for around 300,000 people. That's emergency food packages containing wheat, flour, lentils, oil, salt, and also in the capital of Khartoum. But the conflict really makes it difficult because what we really need as aid agencies, and especially as WFP, to transport food and nutrition supplements in is safe passage and safety guarantees. And that hasn't always been the case in the last 2 years. In recent months, as I mentioned, it's been better, but we need that to be a constant flow of aid deliveries in order to turn the tide of famine in this really dire situation.
So the WFP says that needs nearly $800 million in funding through September, but there is a huge shortfall at this time. How critical is this funding gap? I mean, what does it mean in practical terms for the people on the ground?
So what it means is we have plans to scale up assistance to provide 7 million people per month these emergency food packages, nutrition supplements. At the moment, we're supporting around 4 million people. And if we look back at the needs that I mentioned before, 25 million people, the needs are huge. And even to assist the 7 million who are in the most extreme levels of hunger, emergency levels, catastrophic levels, famine or risk of famine, we need at least $700 million over the next 6 months. And if we don't receive that either we already are facing pipeline breaks, that means the stocks of food coming into the country that we would then distribute will not be available because it takes time to be able to purchase them, to distribute, to get them to the locations where people are and then distribute. And so the longer we have to wait for that funding to come in, it means that people may not get assistance. We may have to reduce rations, for example, that people only receive half of the typical package. And those are really tough and heartbreaking decisions. And we shouldn't be in that position in the 21st century when there are enough resources in the world. And that's why it's really time for donor countries to step up with funding to support the Sudanese people, but also that the international community comes together with concerted diplomatic efforts to end this conflict, which is driving these extremely high levels of humanitarian needs and the food crisis in the country.
Often when we talk about crises like this and we use words like humanitarian needs, sometimes people don't see the face of it. And for me, often I'm worried about the children. And I'm guessing that as you work with colleagues such as UNICEF, the plight of the kids must be enormous, not just schooling, but malnutrition. I mean, these are growth periods in their lives that affect so many things.
Absolutely. So there are also at least 4 million children that are facing acute malnutrition. And if that's not treated, then that has long-term effects for their development, for their ability to learn later in life, to contribute later in a society, to have jobs later in life. And I can speak from, I understand that it's difficult for people to understand what that really means. Recently, I was in Sudan and I met a woman who just had given birth to a child, and she wasn't able, the baby was 5 days old, and the mother was not able to breastfeed her child because the mother herself didn't have enough nutrients. And what does that mean for an infant that's just 5 days old? And what does that then mean a few years down the line? And so it's really heartbreaking. But then when you see that our assistance does help, and this woman that I met personally, she did get WFP assistance, and a few days later she was able to breastfeed again, and the health of her infant improved. And so we do see hope. We do see that we can make a difference. We just need to be able to do so. And again, for that, we need resources and humanitarian access.
Lenny, we're going to have to leave it there, but let's hope that governments, donor nations, and donor organizations can assist with this emergency, because that's what it is. Thanks so much indeed for your time and the work that you're doing.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. That's Lenny Kinsley, who's the head of communications at the World Food Programme in Sudan, and they need about $800 million, millions of people in dire need in Sudan, particularly about 4 million children at this time. It's 7:30 and it's time for your news headlines with Onele Nsinsi.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. The International Court of Justice will later today deliver its order on Sudan's request for provisional measures against the United Arab Emirates. Sudan has accused the Gulf state of complicity in the commission of genocide in Darfur for backing the paramilitary rapid support forces that are fighting against the Sudanese armed forces. South African National Defence Force Chief General Rudzani Mapanya says an agreement has been reached with the M23 rebels in the eastern DRC that all troops and their equipment will be withdrawn unconditionally. And police in Peru say they have retrieved the bodies of 13 miners from a shaft in the Andean region of Pataz. A criminal group involved in illegal gold mining killed the miners. Channel Africa News, I am Onele Nzinzi.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Let's get our update from the world of sports. Here is Musibudi Makura with the details.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. Good morning once again from the sports desk. We'll start with rugby news. So South Africa's Blitzboks side saved their best for last of the season as they went all the way in Los Angeles on Sunday to lift the World Championship title. So Philip Sneeman's team beat Spain in the final of the Elite 8-team tournament following the regular season. They won 19-5 in California to end a perfect weekend. In the semi-final, they managed to defeat New Zealand 26-5, while on day one of the tournament, they won all of their 3 matches in their pool against France, Great Britain as well as Argentina. It was also a second tournament win for South Africa's Sevens team this season, this after also winning their home tournament in Cape Town during the regular season. Let's hear from the winning coach, Philip Sneeman.
I'm very happy as a coach. I think the whole team, we worked extremely hard over the last couple of weeks, and to be honest, a coach can lay out a plan and a coach can give the plan, but the buy-in comes from the players and the special moments that they created on the field. The coach can't coach that, so all credit must go to the players. I'm really proud of them, and they deserve this weekend. They played phenomenal, and they were definitely the best team this weekend.
On to football news now. Sierra Leone have become the first team to qualify for the Africa Cup of Nations Under-20 tournament quarterfinals. This after registering their second win in Group B, beating Tanzania 1-0 at the Suez Canal Stadium over the weekend. So the West Africans have moved to 7 points this after 3 matches and remain unbeaten at this year's tournament with only 1 game to go. The debutants will play South Africa's Amajita on Tuesday, and the head coach Mohamed Lamine Kamara was happy to see his team collecting maximum points once again.
We are new in the tournament, and but we keep learning every day. We knew this match was going to be a very tough one for us because Tanzania, we give everything they have because they lose their first match. And so all we wanted was just to come here today and win. And that will almost 99% chance of qualifying us to the next round.
On to Formula One news now. McLaren's Oscar Piastri won for the 4th time in 6 races this year as he beat teammate Lando Norris in an action-packed Miami Grand Prix last night. Now both McLaren drivers fought intense battles for early leader Max Verstappen's Red Bull as they moved up to the front of the field. Piastri, who started 4th, drove the race of clinical excellence to pass both Mercedes' Kimi Antonelli and then Verstappen to assume the lead before managing his gap to his pursuers to the end. This is what he had to say post that match.
Felt like we nailed everything we could have from a car point of view, and I had to be patient at the start. You know, there was a lot going on, a lot of big manoeuvres being put on out on track, and I just had to bide my time and pick my moment properly, and eventually that came. And then I knew once I got ahead of Max that I had to try and build a gap because the pace was much stronger than when I was behind him.
On to this story now that broke over the weekend. Proteas fast bowler spearhead Kagiso Rabada has been suspended after a recreational drug was found in his system by the South African Institute for Drug-Free Sports. Now, Rabada issued a statement on Saturday via the South African Cricketers Association expressing that he was deeply sorry, but he did not deny using a recreational drug in his statement. Rabada returned to South Africa from the Indian Premier League just last month, having played only 2 matches for the Gujarat Titans. The Titans said in a statement at the time that Rabada was returning home for significant personal matter. It has now been established that Rabada's positive drug test was the reason for his return to the country, with a representative from the South African Institute for Drug-Free Sport confirming that the test was done in South Africa, presumably maybe before he had left for India for the IPL. Now, SADS also issued a statement saying that on Monday they will then have further details on the adverse findings. Meanwhile, in his statement, Rabada apologized to all those that he had let down and also said he will never take the privilege of playing cricket for granted. And finally, in golf news, Scottie Scheffler secured his first win of 2025 with a dominant display at the CJ Cup Byron Nelson in Texas in the USA. The American world number one, who finished fourth at the Masters just last month, carded an 8 under par 63 to finish on 31 under, 8 shots ahead of the nearest rival, Erik van Rooyen. Now, Scheffler also equaled the record for the lowest 72-hole score in PGA Tour history with 253 across the 4 days. It was also the 14th PGA Tour title of his career. That's a wrap from the sports desk at the Sawa. I do return with a final sports update on Africa Rise and Shine in the next hour. As always, for any sports stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or give us a call on +27 11714 4459. It's 7:37 a.m. Central African Time for Channel Africa Sport. I am Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
My name is Neto, N-E-T-O Chamani. Osiatiko, Nengezimo, Mkhanju, Phandle kunjani moyani. Voko tendele. Africa at Play, Asteleli Siashaya. Africa's velvet voice is in the house. Africa at Play is a place to be, where we speak all things sport and music, from the African continent to the rest of the world. We speak to your bundles of joy in sport, 12-year-olds and below, teenagers in sport. And we speak to elite athletes, administrators, coaches, and all the behind-the-scenes stakeholders of sport and music. Africa at Play, Asteleli Siashaya. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
Right, it's time for us to find out what's going on in the world of business and economics. Here's Chanduko Ligege.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning. Egypt's Suez Canal Economic Zone signed a 50-year concession deal with the United Arab Emirates Abu Dhabi Ports Group to set up a 20-square-kilometer logistics and industrial zone east of Port Said. AD Ports has committed $120 million for initial development and feasibility studies in the first phase, which covers an area of 2.8 square kilometers to be developed over the 3 years. According to the cabinet statement, the zone will include a 1.5-kilometer quay, potentially featuring a multi-purpose cargo terminal. SpaceX CEO Elon Musk says the company's satellite system Starlink is now available in Congo. On Friday, the Democratic Republic of Congo said that it had become the latest African country to grant a license to Starlink, reversing an earlier ban. In March last year, the Congolese government said in March 2024 the use of Starlink was banned, with military officials warning that it could be used by rebel groups including Rwandan-backed M23, which has seized more territory than ever before in the east of the country this year. South Africa's gold fields will acquire Gold Road Resources in a sweetened deal valuing the Australian miners' equity at $2.39 billion as sky-high billion prices drive a wave of tie-ups. Gold Road's shares rallied as much as 12% on the offer, which was pitched at a 14.5% premium to the company's last closing price. The buyout will allow Gold Fields to consolidate ownership over the low-cost, long-life Goyera gold mine in Western Australia, which it operates under a joint venture with Gold Road. U.S. President Donald Trump says he plans to impose a 100% tariff on films produced abroad, claiming it will help save the industry from what he called a very fast death. He accused other countries of luring film crews with tax breaks. The move comes weeks after China said it would cut back on the number of U.S. films allowed there. The BBC's Jane Kwan has the details.
Filmmaking is the latest industry which Donald Trump is targeting with tariffs to try to bring jobs back into the U.S. He said the business was dying a very fast death. Speaking to reporters by the Marine One helicopter, he blamed the loss of U.S. movie production on other countries offering financial incentives. The U.S. film industry has been declining for years, badly hit by the pandemic, the growing popularity of streaming services, and the end of DVD sales. Although it isn't clear how these tariffs would be applied.
American billionaire Warren Buffett has announced he will retire as chief executive of Berkshire Hathaway at the end of the year. The 94-year-old is regarded as one of the world's most influential investors. He'll hand over the reins to his chosen successor, Greg Abel. He made the announcement to investors at a meeting in Omaha, which was broadcast on the American news channel CNBC.
The time has arrived where Greg should become the chief executive officer of the company at year end. We'll go forward with that operation, and I will play with a Ouija board or whatever, and that comes out in terms of doing things. But I have no intention of selling one share of Berkshire Hathaway. It'll get given away gradually.
Your financial indicators this morning: $1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 naira 603, Botswana 13 pula 50, Kenya the dollar is at 128 shilling 289, Zambia 27 kwacha 27. BRICS countries: $1 in Brazil is at 5 real 65, Russia 82 rubles 57, India 84 rupee 57, China 7 yuan 21, South Africa $1 is at 18 rand 35, $1 is at 75 pence to the British pound, 88 to the euro. Commodities: gold is at $3,257, platinum at $957 per ounce, the price of Brent crude oil $59.07 a barrel. That's all for now. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or you can call us on +27 11714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I am Chandruko Ligegi.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Africa.
Oui, c'est moi.
Abedi est un passionné de musique dans l'âme. Il a un goût pour toutes sortes de musique et passe ses journées à écouter Channel Africa.
J'aime beaucoup la musique africaine.
Ok. Devinez quoi? Channel Africa veut aider Abedi et les mélomanes du monde entier à découvrir encore plus de musique incroyable. C'est pourquoi Channel Africa appelle les artistes africains à soumettre leur musique. Chers artistes, n'oubliez pas de nous fournir toutes vos informations pertinentes à l'email adresse musique@channelafrica.co.za. Les soumissions sont votre chance d'être entendues, mais elles ne garantissent pas une playlist. Toutes les soumissions seront soigneusement examinées pour voir si elles répondent aux exigences de notre station. Channel Africa, la perspective africaine.
Zochitika ndi madaphiri kamlondola wazochitika pena paliponse.
Aphungu a nyumba ya malamulo mu dziko la Malawi akuchita zokambirana zawo pa zinthu zosiyanasiyana pambuyo pa nyumbayi kutsegulidwa masiku apitawo, ndipo kondani nyamasa ukali nafe pompano chiyambireni aphungu akukambirana masiku apitawo ndi zovuta ziti zomwe zachitika mu nyumba imeneyi ya malamulo.
Ndingathe kunena kuti state of national address imene a president Dr. Lazarus Chakwera akhala kuipereka mnyumba ya malamulo imeneyi idautsa mpungwepungwe kwambiri nyumbayi, chifukwa pofika panopa mene ndikuyankhula pano ndiye kuti munafuna kubuka ndewu mnyumbayi. Leader of the house olemekezeka Richard Kimwendo Banda kuyimirira kuyankha koma mtima zimene amayankhula phungu oyimira ku Blantyre City South East Pasama Suleiman kunena kuti sona imene adapereka president pa 14 February ikuonetsa kuti palibe chilichonse cha zero chimene chidaperekedwa mu sona imeneyi, akuti imene ayichotse.
Zochitika ndi madaphiri lolemba mpaka lachisanu pa nthawi ya 7 koloko kufikira 8 koloko madzulo pa Channel Africa.
Hey there, this is Balisa Dau, part of the dynamic duo that gives you on the move right here on Channel Africa from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Central Africa time. Well, it's with your help for the past 2 years that we have been a multi-award winning show.
Finally, here we're keeping it on the move in 2025. And yes, I'm the other half of the duo, Benjamin Mushatama, and we're going to keep you going with the great conversations. Turn it up.
Okay. On the Move comes back in 2025 to give you more of the content that made us a Maldo and to deliver that bold, boundary-pushing content that you love. And of course, giving you a ride through the 3 hours of news, views, and entertainment.
Every weekday from 9 to midday Central African Time, right here on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Cool.
Let's go.
Bringing you the energy, news, and good vibes to kickstart your day. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
46 minutes past 7 Central African Time. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa. Let's continue now with what's making headlines on our continent and around it. This one specifically on the continent, which is Kenya. Civic Freedoms Forum in Kenya says it has been shocked by the arrest of filmmakers in Kenya. Nicholas Kichuki, Brian Adagala, Mark Denver, Karibi, and Chris Wamai are linked to a BBC documentary titled Blood Parliament. In a statement, the forum says the journalists were arrested from their studio under unclear circumstances. The controversial documentary, The Blood Parliament, has sparked political backlash since its airing in Kenya. Last week, the government spokesperson Isaac Mwaura dismissed the expose as propaganda. Now, to get the latest on the arrested journalists, we speak to their lawyer, Ian Mutiso, who is advocate of the High Court in Kenya, lawyer with the Law Society of Kenya, or managing partner at the IM Mutiso and Company Advocates. He's representing these 4 journalists. Ian, thank you so much for joining us. How are you this morning?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thanks for making time. Firstly, how are your clients doing following the Friday night arrest?
Definitely, they were a bit shaken up after the aggressive arrest, but as of Saturday when they were released, they are more calm. I have spoken to each one of them this morning as we are planning to head over to the Directorate of Criminal Investigations to follow up on these frivolous charges.
The 4 were then subsequently released on Saturday without charge. What led to that release?
Well, it is quite apparent that indeed they did not have probable cause to arrest my clients. And after coordinated effort from the Law Society of Kenya, together with the 7 media houses, the Editors Guild in Kenya, the pressure was too big enough for the government to realize that this is something which was that jumped the horse before the cat. And in this whole arrest, which was also undertaken a day before the Press Freedom Day, it was a very big mistake, and I think that's why they yielded to our concerns on that particular day.
The charges for which your clients were arrested include false information and cyber bullying. What are you able to share with us at the moment with regards to these?
Just for clarification, on the OB records where my clients were being detained in the respective police stations, that is in Pangani and Muthaiga police station, the OB reads that they were being held on the charges of publication of false information. And in our inquiry, and as according to my clients on how they were being interrogated, they're being asked questions as in reference to the Blood Parliament documentary, of which they had no role and part of generating that, as you can see also from the statement from the BBC. But that notwithstanding, it's also very apparent that from the CCTV footage of the arrest, we could actually tell that this was a targeted arrest towards my client. So in that essence, even today, our appearance before the investigation officers at DCI, we are very keen to find out exactly what was the probable cause for the arrest on Friday.
Do they all directly link to this BBC documentary that was aired, Blood Parliament? The BBC on Saturday said the filmmakers were not involved in the making of the documentary.
It is true they're not involved in the making of the BBC documentary Blood Parliament. And that notwithstanding, I believe the officers from the DCI, this is the Director of Criminal Investigations, had an assumption that they were involved in the making of that documentary, perhaps maybe because my clients did have a few footages of the events that took place on 25th June, and also because they are tied with the famous activist Bonnie Mwangi, because those two of my clients actually work with Semo Kweli, which is a media house in Kenya, and work closely with Boniface Mwangi. So I believe they had that presumption in mind.
So where to from now? What course will be taken legally from this entire situation? There are also reports that have quoted you saying that your clients were allegedly forced to sign statements without legal representation.
It is quite unfortunate that even we could tell that my clients were not accorded right to counsel, according to the CCTV footage which I was able to acquire on Saturday evening. And right now, my priority is to actually not only have an apology from the officers who proceeded to make this arrest without due consideration of the probable cause, but also it is my objective to have my clients receive their work products, the gadgets that they seized without a court order. Mm-hmm. And ideally, I also want to have an explanation on why this targeted operation was conducted. Right. So that is my objective for the day today.
Let's leave it there for now, Ian. I think we'll be getting more updates as the week progresses on this story. So we really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
A pleasure. Ian Mutiso, advocate of the High Court in Kenya, lawyer with the Law Society of Kenya, who is representing the four alleged journalists who were involved in Blood Parliament, that BBC documentary.
Hey there, this is Balisa Tau, part of the dynamic duo that gives you on the move right here on Channel Africa from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Central Africa time. Well, it's with your help for the past 2 years that we have been a multi-award winning show.
Finally, yeah, we're keeping it on the move in 2025. And yes, I'm the other half of the duo, Benjamin Mushatama, and we're going to keep you going with the great conversations. Turn it up.
Okay. On the Move comes back in 2025 to give you more of the content that made us a Maldo and to deliver that bold, boundary-pushing content that you love. And of course, giving you a ride through the 3 hours of news, views, and entertainment.
Every weekday from 9 to midday Central African time, right here on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Cool.
Let's go.
Tune in and turn up the volume. This is Channel Africa.
Right, it's time now for us to take a look at the financial and economic stories that have been shaping the markets across the continent and beyond. And this is things like weather-related disruptions in Mauritius to currency pressures in South Africa and key developments in oil and monetary policy. There's plenty to unpack, and to make sense of it all, we're now joined on the line by Menzi Ndlovu, who's a political economist and at Signal Risk. Thanks so much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Good morning, sir. It's a pleasure to be joining you.
Great. Let's start in Mauritius. The country shut its banks and stock exchange due to severe weather warning. And whilst it's an isolated event, what kind of ripple effects can decisions like this have on investor confidence and regional financial flows?
I think when it comes to Mauritius, it's not as much of a shock as one would expect. So the shutdown occurs during what is commonly known as cyclone season. And this is the period between November and May that typically experiences adverse weather conditions, not just in Mauritius, but the wider Indian Ocean basin. We know that Mozambique also grapples with similar issues. So in as much as it is disruptive on day-to-day services, I think this is something that investors and operators in Mauritius are conscious about. And I think another thing to consider is that Mauritius is fairly well capitalized. It's a very resilient market in as much as it is small. And so small disruptions like this, in as much as optically they don't look particularly good, the country's stock markets and broader financial markets are able to absorb the shock that is induced by the shutdown. And we've seen some degree of normalization since the heavy rainfall that occurred last week. So, in as much as it's not pleasant, Mauritius is able to recover and has been able to recover, and this is something that is unfamiliar and unsurprising to investors.
Turning to South Africa, the rand slipped yet again as investors are busy waiting for the revised budget. I am curious, what are the risks here? What are people worried about, investors, in terms of this fiscal story that's dragging on?
I think this has become, and this has fundamentally been, a more political than economic issue. So economically, we know what needs to happen. All right. We know that the government needs to make the tough decisions that they've been kicking the can on for the past decade, one would say. And that is essentially absorbing the burden of fiscal prudence. All right. Over the past 10 years or so, we have chosen to increase spending, and we have chosen to finance that through debt. And now we've gotten to a point where we can no longer do that. And we can no longer look outward. And the government needs to look inward in order to tighten up its own purse. But we know that there's been reluctance to do that. All right. And we're now at a point where we have to make difficult trade-offs. So the question is, does the GNU, and in particular, does the ANC have that political will and capacity to make the tough decision of cutting down spending? And this is not necessarily calling for austerity, but rather to trim the fat and to get rid of unnecessary expenditure. There have been calls to reduce the size of cabinet. Those calls have fallen on deaf ears. There are various other areas or items of spending where there is capacity to shed a bit of the fat. And the government, or the ANC-led government, has been quite reluctant to do that. And I think the budget that's coming up, Budget 3.0, will be a test. And it's also a test to see whether or not the ANC and the DA can come to consensus over fiscal policies and broader policies. So it's more a political issue than an economic one. We know what we have to do economically, but the question is, do we have the political will? And that is what markets are looking at, the politics behind the economics.
And very briefly, what are the big items that you're looking at this week that might affect the markets, in your view?
So we're looking at discussions between the DA and the ANC leading up to the 21st of May. We're looking at how they navigate the 13.5 billion rand shortfall, which is not a particularly big one, to be honest with you, in the short term, but the wider 75 billion rand shortfall, that's a bit more of a concern. So we're looking at measures around overcoming that shortfall. We're looking at measures to capacitate SARS, as has been said, in order to bridge that shortfall, and whether or not they look towards reducing some of the transfer spending that's been spoken about by members of government. And then we're also looking at measures to try and stimulate job creation and, broadly speaking, economic growth that can lead to some degree of consolidation through the growth pathway. Right. So those are some of the things that we'll be keeping our eyes on.
Menzi, great talking to you. Thanks so much indeed. And we look forward to chatting to you again in the near future.
Absolutely, sir. Have a good day.
Thank you. That's Menzi Ndoro, political economist at Signal Risk. And that music means it is
for our third and final hour here on Rise and Shine. It's 8 o'clock Central African time. And what we can look forward to this month, this hour is Africa Month talks, and May being recognized as Africa Month, and a time to celebrate the continent's vibrant culture, our heritage, and the founding of the Organization of the African Unity. If you were listening in the previous hour, you heard Peter there with this day in history insert that links to that story. So that and more coming up after the news with Oneli Nzinzi, and then sports headlines with Musubudi Makura.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. The International Court of Justice will later today deliver its order on Sudan's request for provisional measures against the United Arab Emirates. Sudan has accused the Gulf state of complicity in the commission of genocide in Darfur for backing the paramilitary rapid support forces that are fighting against the Sudanese armed forces. The UAE has rejected the allegations, Sharon Bryce Peace reports.
The UAE denied supporting the RSF in Sudan and has described the ICJ case as political theatre and a distraction from efforts to end the war that has created one of the largest humanitarian disasters in the world. Legal experts have indicated that the case might come down to a question of jurisdiction. While a signatory to the convention, the UAE entered a reservation to Article 9, which allows countries to take each other to the ICJ to settle disputes. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights warned on Thursday that the horrors unfolding in Sudan knew no bounds, warning of war crimes. The United States determined in January that the RSF had committed genocide in Sudan.
South African National Defence Force Chief General Rudzani Mapwanya says an agreement was reached by the M23 rebels in the Eastern DRC that all troops and the equipment will be withdrawn unconditionally. He says South Africa is not abandoning the peace mission in the DRC, but the withdrawal is a decision taken by the Southern African regional body SADC and East African community to find lasting peace in that country. Pretoria has started with a phased withdrawal. General Mapanya explains.
The engagement that we had with M23 when we went to Goma was to tell them that we are going to withdraw our personnel and equipment unconditionally. That element was informed by the developments that were taking place. We have seen that there is an agreement that had been signed.
The South African National Prosecuting Authority spokesperson Mthunzi Mahaka says it is important that a judicial commission of inquiry establish whether attempts were made to prevent the investigation or prosecution of the apartheid-era crimes referred by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to the NPA. This comes as some victims' families allege interference from the highest levels of government. Mahaka says if families get answers, they will find for justice and closure, and that will be served.
We're in support of it because there have been these allegations of either political interference or pressure exerted on certain individuals within the prosecutorial component in the criminal justice system. So I think it's only fair that the families of the victims of the apartheid-era crimes who have a direct and substantial interest in the resolution or finalization of this matter so that they can have some closure, get to have answers through that commission of inquiry.
South Africa's African National Congress Party has slammed the conduct of some of its members of caucus in Parliament who are against the party's continued relations with the Democratic Alliance Party. This follows reports that some ANC MPs expressed their frustration at the party's National Executive Committee's failure to decide on the DA's participation in the government of national unity. The ANC members raised their dissatisfaction at the DA's recent court challenge of the Employment Equity Amendment Act. ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula says the conduct of some party members borders on ill discipline.
Members of the ANC must be disciplined. Leaking information to the media is detrimental to the cohesion of our movement. And I've said to the media that, look, there is no caucus that can revolt against the ANC. It will never happen. There is no caucus of the ANC that can rebel against the ANC. People have got a choice to join other political parties. Those members of caucus have been disciplined. They took orders from their party and they've raised their views, and we respect their views, even if it is dissent. And I will report to the officials and I will report to the NWC about some of the things that comrades raised.
Lastly, police in Peru say they have retrieved bodies of 13 miners from a shaft in the Andean region of Pataz. A criminal group involved in illegal gold mining killed the miners. The deceased were kidnapped a week ago after their employer sent them to the region to confront the gang. The BBC's Leonardo Rocha.
These young security guards are working for a mining company. They were sent to this area in the Andes to basically try to get control of the area that had been stormed by a criminal gang. They went in there and they were kidnapped by this gang of heavily armed people, and they were kept inside a mining shaft. And for a week, the family were getting mobile phone messages from these criminals telling them to tell the police to stay away, otherwise they'll be killing them, until all communication stopped.
Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Nzinzi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
And coming up, your sports news this hour, the AFCON Under-20 rocked by age-cheating allegations out in Morocco. And South Africa won the HSBC Sevens World Championship title in Los Angeles. Details of these and other stories at 8:30.
Wake up, Africa. Peter Ndoro and Asanda Beda are here to help you rise and shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time. Only on Channel Africa.
Vue d'Afrique avec Joël Mouteba.
Sadio, quelles sont les motivations derrière la décision du général Mamadi Doumbouya d'accorder la grâce présidentielle à Moussa Dadis Camara?
Alors, officiellement ici, c'est pour des raisons de santé, et puis le décret aussi a ajouté que c'est dans un élan de réconciliation nationale et c'est un cas social. Mais au-delà de ça, les analystes ils voient sous un angle politique. Les moins critiques estiment que c'est pour peut-être faciliter un petit peu la réconciliation que pourrait tenter aujourd'hui le CNSD.
Vue d'Afrique. Du lundi au vendredi de 15h à 16h, temps universel.
Start your day right with Channel Africa Breakfast.
That smells delicious.
Live, 5 days a week.
Right, it's 8 minutes past 8 Central African time. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. And it's an important time, particularly if you're Catholic, because the world is awaiting the selection of a new pope following the passing of Pope Francis. The Catholic Church stands at a crossroads. For many survivors of clerical abuse and their advocates, well, this moment presents a critical opportunity for the Church to turn the page, not with more words, but with decisive action. Gemma Hickey is a leading voice in that call for change, a survivor, author, and long-time advocate. They currently serve as president of the board of directors of Ending Clergy Abuse, a global coalition working to hold the church accountable and ensure justice for survivors. Gemma joins us now to reflect on what the papal transition means for those who've been wounded by the church and what kind of leadership the Catholic world desperately needs at this time. Gemma, thanks very much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Peter, thank you for having me. It's lovely to meet you.
Perhaps we can start with your thoughts about the work of Ending Clergy Abuse and what motivated you to personally get involved.
Well, I'm a survivor from the east coast of Canada. I come from an island called Newfoundland, and like many places around the world, we've been hit with clergy abuse. In St. John's, the capital city of Newfoundland, where I'm from, Newfoundland and Labrador, I was abused by a diocesan priest, and so were many other victims. We also have orphanages, like Mount Cashel Orphanage for boys, Belvedere Orphanage for girls, and many were abused in those institutions. In Labrador, where we have a high Indigenous population, many survivors were forced into residential schools, and so growing up on an island was isolating, and I didn't really have the language to describe or talk about or the support to be able to deal with what I was going through, and this was very isolating, and so I became involved in advocacy and human rights advocacy and in my province and in Canada, and then got involved at a national level. I founded an organization back home in Newfoundland called Pathways. And from there, through that advocacy, I was able to meet other survivors And when I came to the Papal Summit in 2019, was able to connect and network. And then I started to become involved with ending clergy abuse. And so it's very validating to meet survivors from all different parts of the world who have had the same experience that I did. I did come forward as a teenager, and I was forced to settle outside of court. And the one thing I wanted was for the priest to be removed from the altar. I didn't understand what clericalism meant at the time. I didn't understand any of those things. All I knew was that there was one other victim, and I just knew that he should not have access to vulnerable people. And that meant that he should be removed from the altar. So I wanted him to retire, and I wanted the church to pay for my therapy, which they did. And he did retire for a short period of time, but then he was moved to another parish just very close to my house. And so my family had to move funerals around. We had to avoid certain places where we knew he would be. It was very, very damaging. I thought that was an isolated incident. But when I got involved with this cause, across my country and then abroad, and I met survivors from all different parts of the world, many from Africa, I realized that what they're doing is they're recycling these predators. They're moving them from place to place. The church needs to be held to account for this reason, because it's obviously an institutional response. And so that's why it's really important to do the work of ending clergy abuse, and why connecting survivors from all different parts of the world helps us push for reform within the church.
Tell me a little bit about some of the patterns and some of the stories that have emerged. Given your position now, you're hearing a lot of these stories and probably got a global view now of what some of the priests in the Catholic Church have been doing for years and decades.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's really every survivor I've met, and I've met thousands, and I carry their stories with me every day. And, it's our main focus now with ending clergy abuse is in the developing world. We just held a historic summit in the Philippines where we exposed the hidden crisis of clergy abuse there. And, as someone that has come from North America with access to free press, I have some level of privilege. I'm white. My abuse was horrific, but at the same time, when I meet fellow survivors from other parts of the world, I realize that there's always someone out there that's in a worse situation. And what we're seeing in the developing world is that there's so much poverty, and people are heavily dependent on the church, and they are afraid to come forward. I've heard stories from people in Africa where certain villages, they're afraid to come forward about their rapist priests because the church is supplying villages with medicine and food, and so therefore they risk being exiled from their community as a result. So they had to choose between food for their families or medicine for their village, or telling on their rapist priest. I mean, this is the choice that these brave, incredible people have, and yet they endure the suffering, and this is wrong. And so I really feel that while North America dioceses in North America have been held somewhat to a standard of safeguarding, very minimal, because things haven't really changed dramatically here, but at least there are other options to come forward. Whereas in the developing world, there's just tragic situations. And I really take an intersectional approach to this advocacy work, because there are layers to this type of abuse, and especially if you're not white and you don't come from some level of privilege or have access to an education or resources or a support network. And so, that's really important to us at Ending Clergy Abuse, to be able to provide a network, a channel for survivors from other parts of the world to be able to tell their stories, even if they can't come forward and name. At least there's a platform for us to amplify their stories, their voices, with their permission, of course.
Gemma, it must be impossible to quantify, but do you have a general idea of just how big this problem has been in terms of numbers of children that have been abused over time?
That's such a large question, and I can't quantify it per se because it's so enormous. I mean, this is a global crisis.
Are we talking hundreds of thousands of children?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And I would even say that this is a matter of public safety. Even if you're not involved, even if you're not Catholic, and you're around this community, a Catholic community. I mean, the protocols are not in place. There's no screening protocols. Case in point, in Canada, a Christian brother who was charged and served jail time in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador at Mount Cashel Orphanage was repurposed in British Columbia on the other side of the country in a Catholic school and is now up on charges. And this is recent. A priest from India was sent to a reservation in Manitoba and is up on charges for molesting Indigenous children. So we're seeing this pattern all over the world. People are not safe. And what we're also seeing as well is that parishioners, the faithful, are bearing the burden, because in many parts of North America, dioceses are being sold off to settle claims because they're going bankrupt. Then they can reincorporate, and the structure, people in power, has not changed. So we're calling on the church to look at that structure. We're challenging bishops.
That helps me with my next question, actually, because you've issued a powerful open letter to the College of Cardinals. What are you calling for, and what does real reform look like for you going forward with the new Pope?
We are looking at the record of each candidate and how they have handled abuse within their regions. That's what's important here for us, because going forward, we really need someone to continue the efforts that Pope Francis has made. Now, could more have been done? Absolutely. But there's a start. And so going forward, we need the next Pope to do that. We're calling on zero tolerance when it comes to clergy sexual abuse. In 2002, there was a norm that was put in canon law for U.S. bishops by the Pope. And we want that norm, which is basically a one strike and you're out policy. So if you abuse a child, a minor, then you are out. You do not get to serve on the altar. And this is what we want universally. So what we're hearing in other parts of the world is that, well, for the most part, I believe Pope Francis had said, and I think this is common in North America, that the age of consent is 18 and over. However, in certain parts of the world, they look at when a woman menstruates at 14, and that's someone that can marry. So, we're trying to get this established universally, but it's been difficult because we find that bishops are saying that this is not culturally sensitive. So anyway, we're having these types of discussions. We are doing some great work with the Pontifical Gregorian University through Father Hans Zollner, a Jesuit, and he's the leading ecclesiastical expert. So Ending Clergy Abuse is already working on these canon law revisions, and we did launch them last fall, and we're pushing for that now. So we want a priest or anyone affiliated with the church, a nun, a Christian brother, We want them one strike, you're out, no exceptions. And it's really important that going forward, the church do the right thing.
Pope Francis, they say that he was a reformer and that he did try to look at these issues. Where do you think he fell short, maybe?
I feel that the Vatican is a political party like all the others. There seemed to be a real push for him to not be so progressive. And I feel like he entered, his tenure very strong in terms of clergy sexual abuse, tackling the issue. He did come out and say that he wanted zero tolerance. We had the Pontifical Commission for Minors set up, and also there was the first papal summit in 2019 on clergy sexual abuse. So we do recognize these efforts. However, survivors deserve more than symbolic gestures. We want concrete actions. And what we're seeing is that in the beginning of his papacy, there was some major steps in the right direction. However, he seemed to have gotten stuck. And that's from the conservatism that's sweeping, most of the world now. And it seems to be the case from African and U.S. bishops. So, we're watching this very closely. We have our ear to the ground. We're meeting with church officials where and when we can. My colleague in Uganda, Janita Guti, operates the Totio platform. She's been helping survivors on the ground there and has been an incredible resource for us as an organization. And, we really, really need the next pope to take this seriously because we're not backing down on this. We're holding a press conference today. We're also going to be releasing a set of demands that are going to outline exactly what we need in order for the church to show that it's reforming. And we're here and we're not going to go away in that way, and we're going to do what we can for survivors. There's so much to look at. Earlier on, you talked about clericism. I wonder if you could speak to us a little bit more about that for our listeners, so that they can understand what it is and the secrecy that goes around it. Well, it's basically that the church is prioritizing the institution over the people that it's supposed to be protecting. So because of the power structure, the heteropatriarchy, the patriarchy, the very structure of the church, its doctrine is centered around this patriarchal structure. And there's seems to be a motivation to keep that structure in play. Women have what seems like a secondary role in the church. And, there's been calls for change in that regard for many, many years. And the church is lagging behind when it comes to gender equity. And, my view is that in order to look at this issue fully, that we need to look at gender and how the church views gender and how it's structured in this hierarchical way with men, at the top. And, obviously people in the church are wanting to keep those power structures in play. And it's interesting, Peter, from meeting with all these church officials and from meeting with so many survivors, the common theme that I found, the thread that unites us really is the word fear. Fear. That's interesting, right? So what I've heard from these higher ups is they're afraid to speak out. They're afraid. And I'm hearing that from survivors on the ground. Now, granted, these bishops and cardinals are afraid, and it's not the same as someone on the ground in a village afraid. Not at all. But it's a starting point of how we can look at the structure of the Catholic Church. It's fear. Fear keeps us from speaking out. It keeps those within from speaking out, and it keeps those outside from speaking out. And so when I can put it that way, it's like they get it. But what's happening is everyone has something on someone else within the church, it seems. This is my experience. This is the experience of my colleagues when we meet with church officials, that it could just be perhaps a priest is having an affair, whether that's with a man or a woman, or, there's other things at play here. People are afraid to speak out because they're afraid to be exposed in their own situations. And what's interesting too is that not all victims that come to us are in communities around the world, in parishes or villages, or they're actually nuns and priests.
Wow.
So nuns and priests are getting victimized as well. Nuns are being raped, seminarians are being raped. So this needs to be addressed. This is a problem, and it is clericalism because it's reinforcing that culture of secrecy and fear, which is preventing people from coming forward. And we need to make that space. We need to be very deliberate about creating the space for people to come forward so that they can be heard and that we can look at this issue with sincerity,
Right.
in truth, and deal with it appropriately.
Let's talk a little bit about this conclave and these cardinals and their credibility to be able to deliver a pope. I believe that a cardinal that was previously sanctioned for abuse is reportedly participating in this conclave. What does this say about the church's credibility at the moment then?
Not very much, obviously. We're very disappointed in that. We've highlighted that in media as well, and it's more of the same. More of the same. We want something different. We want a show of solidarity in a way that is tangible, and by allowing someone that Pope Francis sanctioned to participate is, quite frankly, it feels like a slap in the face to survivors, and we deserve dignity, we deserve respect, and we're not getting it, and enough is enough. So, already it's not off to a good start from our perspective,
Are there some cardinals that you think might give you hope, looking at their track records and what they've done, despite the fact, as you said, that this is a system which sometimes might be bigger than the personalities?
It's interesting. We're just looking at the records right now, and yes, there are some that are more progressive than others, but our main concern is who has handled clergy abuse appropriately in their specific regions. And that's what our main focus is, because our goal as an organization is to advocate on behalf of survivors. So we're just following along. We're here. We're adding our voice to the discourse around the conclave, not naming any names, but waiting to see what happens and who we have to work with. And who they choose will determine the tone going forward on a number of things. But in particular, this global crisis and how we, as a global organization for survivors, will work with the Catholic Church going forward.
All right. We've run out of time, but very briefly, just again, to get a sense of the size of the problem, do you have any idea how much money the Catholic Church has spent in settling cases and keeping them quiet?
Oh my God. I mean, I can't even. It's the same kind of thing with how many survivors are out there.
Is this billions, multi-millions, billions? What are we doing?
Oh, it's so much more than people realize. And, being here and seeing all the poor people, poor people at the bottom of like a footnote at the Vatican, wrapped around the Vatican like garland, essentially, and the hypocrisy, and if the Vatican had sold, one painting, they could settle pretty much a lot of the cases in Newfoundland, and there seems to be this real pushback, fighting it in court, paying off people to stay quiet. and also, paying lawyers an outrageous amount of money to defend the institution when it could be done another way. There's always another way, and we're going to push for that other way. And so, it's really just heartbreaking, because what's happening is parishioners as well as survivors are bearing the burden of the sins of our fathers. And, again, also good clergy, good nuns, good priests, good brothers within the church are enduring harmful stereotypes and displacement, and dioceses are going bankrupt, and the Vatican remains cloaked in wealth. There's something wrong with this picture. I'll end it at that.
Gemma, we're going to have to end it there as well. Thank you so much indeed for joining us, and thank you for the work that you're doing. I grew up Catholic, luckily wasn't subject to abuse. We had some pretty good priests and nuns, and as you say, there's so many good ones that get caught up, sadly, in the work of some that aren't, and the church really should be doing better. Gemma, thanks for your time, and thanks for the work you're doing.
Thank you, Peter. It was a real pleasure. Have a good day.
Thank you. That's Gemma Hickey, who's currently the president of the Board of Directors of Ending Clergy Abuse, a global coalition working to hold the Catholic Church accountable and ensure justice for survivors. We'll have to wait and see who the new Pope is and how they deal with this this perennial and terrible issue that's been going on for decades. It's 7:32. It's time for your news headlines. Here's Onelen Sinsi.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Former Gabonese Army General Brice Oligui Nguema has been formally sworn in as Gabon's president, marking the end of a 19-month transitional period under military rule as the country returns to constitutional governance. The South African National Prosecuting Authority spokesperson Mthunzi Mahaka says it is important that a judicial commission of inquiry establish whether attempts were made to prevent the investigation or prosecution of the apartheid-era crimes referred by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to the NPA. And Israeli media says the country's security cabinet has unanimously approved a plan to expand its military offensive in Gaza. Channel Africa News, I'm Onel Nzinzi.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Let's say good morning for the last time for our sports update here on Africa Rise and Shine on this Monday. Here's Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. Indeed, for the last time this morning on Africa Rise and Shine, we'll start with those stories. So the Under-20 Africa Cup of Nations tournament currently underway in Egypt has been rocked by allegations of age cheating, and some coaches have now started airing their voices, saying enough is enough. Now, first to raise his concern was Tanzania's head coach Hamde Suleiman, complaining about the ages of Sierra Leone players, saying they are not under 20 players. The Tanzanian team had just lost to Sierra Leone 1-0 in Ismailia, and the West Africans, making their debut in the tournament, became the first team to qualify for the quarterfinals.
These are local players. Most of them, they are playing the second division or first division, comparing to even this team that Sierra Leone. If you see them, they are a little bit bigger than age-wise. It's not under 20 if you see. But we put more effort now to build up this young program, youth program, so that in the future we come up with a good and strong side.
Now, age cheating in African football has long been a serious concern, and the Confederation of African Football looks to have won the fight when they introduced the MRI scans. But this can only work up to the under-17 boys level and not beyond that. Zambia's under-20 head coach Boyd Mulandwa says the cancer of age cheating can damage the game and players.
But on our side, it's just to encourage the boys to keep on fighting. It's a youth tournament. We expect youth to be playing against youths, but if you bring people who are not in that category, it becomes difficult for others. And others, they just get intimidated by just looking at someone. You can tell that this guy is older than me, and it's going to be difficult for me to challenge him. That is the the message that I can just say.
Rugby news now. South Africa's Blitzboks saved their best for last this season as they went all the way in Los Angeles on Sunday to lift the World Championship title. Philip Snyman's team beat Spain in the final of the Elite 8-team tournament following the regular season. They won 19-5 in California to end a perfect weekend. Meanwhile, in the semi-final, they managed to defeat New Zealand 26-5, while on day one of the tournament, they won all three of their pool matches against France, Great Britain, as well as Argentina. It was the second tournament win for the SA Sevens team this season, this after winning their home tournament in Cape Town during the regular season. Philip Snyman is the coach of the Blitzbok.
I'm very happy as a coach. I think the whole team, we worked extremely hard over the last couple of weeks, and to be honest, a coach can lay out a plan and a coach can give the plan, but the buy-in comes from the players and the special moments that they created on the field. The coach can't coach that, so all credit must go to the players. I'm really proud of them, and they deserve this weekend. They played phenomenal, and they were definitely the best team this weekend.
On to tennis news now. Norway's Casper Ruud won his first Masters 1000 title on Sunday as he stormed to a 7-5, 3-6, 6-4 victory over fifth seed Jack Draper in the Madrid Open final with a gutsy performance that has showcased his clay court mettle. Now, the 26-year-old 14th seeded player playing in his 18th clay court final overcame both a rib injury sustained in the semi-final as well as a resilient Draper to secure the trophy after previously dispatching Taylor Fritz, Daniel Medvedev as well as Francesco Cerundolo. Now, Ruud had previously reached 3 Grand Slam finals, including 2 at Roland Garros, the Masters 1000 finals in Miami back in 2022, as well as the Monte Carlo Masters final last year. And finally, on the golf course, Scottie Scheffler secured his first win of 2025 with a dominant display at the CJ Cup Byron Nelson in Texas in the USA. The American world number 1, 28 years of age as well, who finished 4th at the Masters last month, carded an 8 under par 63 to finish on 31 under par, 8 shots ahead of his nearest rival Eric van Rooyen. Scheffler, who equaled the record of the lowest 72-hole score in the PGA Tour history with 253 across 4 days, is won his 14th PGA title of his career in winning, of course, the CJ Cup Byron Nelson out in the USA. 8:38 p.m. Central African Time, a.m. Central African Time. That's a wrap of your sports news this hour. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, our email address is newsroom@channelafrica.co.za. Alternatively, give us a call. The newsroom line is +27 11714 4459. For Channel Africa Sport, I am Musibu D. Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective. This is for when you have to wake your neighbors up. Weekends, 3 to 6 in the morning.
On that beautiful piano tip. This is Angelic, hanging out with Demtuda. And the musical chef, Wamuhle. It basically means you are beautiful. You know what? It makes me think, though, if I were a woman, I would be very appreciative, meeting guys that will tell you that you're beautiful. But I think the annoying part, though, you know those ones. Baby, my size. That one should be very annoying. Yeah, no wonder I'm not a woman.
When you have to wake your neighbors up, play them the morning switch on the weekends with the Shy Guy, 3 to 6 in the morning, Central African Time. Your morning companion with the stories that matter. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
And right now it's time for business and economics news with Chanduko Ligege.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning.
The Democratic Alliance is set to address the media today about its High Court challenge against the Employment Equity Act. The party argues that the legislation's race-based employment quotas could exclude countless South Africans from job opportunities. The African National Congress has accused its largest government of National Unity partner of being against transformation following the DA's legal challenge. DA Labour spokesperson Michael Bergrame has, however, conceded that there is still a need for redress.
There is an absolute need for redress, and we need to explore ways and means of assisting that redress to ensure that we reflect the demographic of the country and at the job market. And if we've had 25 years of employment equity legislation in this country, and it's destroyed jobs. Look at what the National Party did. It's exactly that. They practiced affirmative action, and we saw where that led us. It was destructive to any equality amongst workers.
Some labour laws experts in South Africa say the Labour Relations Act can be used to determine whether requiring employees to return to the office is lawful. This is the number of people working from home increases. However, many South African employers are now reconsidering their policies and requesting employees to return to the office. Yvonne Mgefa is a labour law expert.
While there is no specific piece of legislation, but the contract of employment would state where an employee could work. When something is contained in your contract of employment, that affords rights for the employer and the employee equally. So if your contract of employment states expressly that you can work, or your place of work is remote, you can work from home or anywhere else in the world, then before the employer can actually require you to return to the office, they need to engage you, either in the form of consultation or negotiation.
SpaceX CEO Elon Musk says the company's satellite system Starlink is now available in Congo. On Friday, the Democratic Republic of Congo said that it had become the latest African country to grant a license to Starlink, reversing an earlier ban. In March last year, the Congolese government said in March 2024 the use of Starlink was banned, with military officials warning that it could be used by rebel groups including Rwandan-backed M23, which has seized more territory than ever before in the east of the country this year. According to the International Telecommunication Union, war-torn Congo has low connectivity, with just around 30% of the population using the internet as of 2023. In North Africa, Egypt's Suez Canal Economic Zone signed a 50-year concession deal with the United Arab Emirates Abu Dhabi Ports Group to set up a 20-square-kilometer logistics and industrial zone east of Port Said. AD Ports has committed $120 million for initial development and feasibility studies in the first phase, which covers an area of 2.8 square kilometers to be developed over 3 years. According to the cabinet statements, the zone will include a 1.5-kilometer quay, potentially featuring a multi-purpose cargo terminal. U.S. President Donald Trump says he plans to impose a 100% tariff on films produced abroad, claiming it will help save the industry from what he called a very fast death. He accused other countries of luring film crews with tax breaks. The move comes weeks after China said it would cut back on the number of U.S. films allowed there. The BBC's Jake Kwan has the details.
Filmmaking is the latest industry which Donald Trump is targeting with tariffs to try to bring jobs back into the U.S. He said the business was dying a very fast death. Speaking to reporters by the Marine One helicopter, he blamed the loss of U.S. movie production on other countries offering financial incentives. The U.S. film industry has been declining for years, badly hit by the pandemic, the growing popularity of streaming services, and the end of DVD sales. Although it isn't clear how these tariffs would be applied.
Taking a look at financial indicators this morning, $1 US in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 naira 603, in Botswana 13 pula 50. Kenya, the dollar is at 128 shilling to 89. Zambia, 27 kwacha 78. BRICS countries, $1 in Brazil is at 5 real 65. Russia, 82 rubles 57. India, 84 rupee 57. China, 7 yuan 21. South Africa, $1 at 835. $1 is at 75 pence to the British pound, 88 to the euro. Commodities, gold is at $3,259. Platinum at $960 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil at $59.25 a barrel. That is all for now. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or you can call us on +27 11714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I am Chandruko Ligege.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective. Your morning companion with the stories that matter. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
46 minutes past 6 Central African time it is, and let's move on to talking Africa Month. And this is the month of May that's being recognized as Africa Month. It's a time to celebrate the continent's vibrant culture, heritage, and the founding of the Organization of African Unity, or the OAU, in 1963, which is now the African Union, or the AU. Observed annually on May 25th, this year's African Month is being celebrated under the theme United in Resilience for the Defense of Our Freedom and Democracy. However, with significant strides being made, a pressing question remains. With many indigenous Africans still facing poverty, landlessness, and disenfranchisement, despite the wealth beneath their feet, is there truly cause to celebrate? Let's explore this question, and being joined now by Stembiso Msomi, who is national spokesperson for the Embo Kingdom Royal House. But Stembiso Kunjani, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity, and good morning to the listeners.
We appreciate your time. Let's unpack the theme for Africa Day this year. It emphasizes united in resilience for the defense of our freedom and democracy. What do you think is the most critical step for African nations to take to achieve true unity, both politically and economically?
The most critical step for African nations is actually to establish economic independence and sovereignty alongside with unity, because without economic independence, political freedom still remains vulnerable to external influences. If you can see, African nations should strengthen intracontinental trade through initiatives like the African Continental Free Trade Area, ensuring that our industries, technology, and financial systems serve African interests first. Furthermore, unity must be driven by cultural preservation. Our languages actually identifies who we are as Africans. Indigenous knowledge systems should also be restored, which also identifies our heritage, and the traditional governance structures through indigenous leadership also need to be embedded in policy making to safeguard our identity. And with that, I think those are the critical steps that needed to be taken in account to achieve true unity, both politically and economically.
What kind of steps should we be taking then on the part of safeguarding our freedom and cultural identity, apart from the true unity that is needed? You speak of language as being a center of who we are as Africans, and a need to move back to, or at least have an understanding of, our indigenous systems.
Yeah, the unity actually calls for all African states, north, south, east, and west, to actually, through their indigenous leaders, mobilize their communities and actually push one agenda of cultural and heritage restoration. Because with the evolving world, we see technology taking a center stage. And if you look at technology, it's an external initiative most of the time. Not that in Africa we don't have technological advances or technological technological innovations. But the most influence in technology comes from outside Africa. So
hello, Butstebi, are you still there?
African culture and yes, I'm
Okay.
still here.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Please continue. Sorry, there was a bit of a glitch on our lines there.
All right. Yeah, as I was saying, with technology, it has so much influence of the external countries outside Africa. So if we actually make a space for indigenous leaders, which are kings, queens, chiefs in Africa, to actually engage their communities and restore their cultural and heritage identity. That will be, I think, the first step towards this unity, which of it was used before. The political system, because we had political systems before, which was actually uniting communities and eventually uniting our states in Africa.
Many African cultures have been marginalized or eroded over time due to colonial influence and globalization. In your view, how can African societies begin the process of restoring and reviving their cultural heritage, especially when it comes to this modern life and modern world we are living under?
Again, riding on what I've said before, restoring African cultural heritage requires a multifaceted approach, beginning with education reform. African history, indigenous languages, and traditional governance systems should be integrated in our schools' curriculum. For instance, governments must invest in cultural institutions that document and celebrate African heritage. Additionally, the global digital space presents an opportunity for African nations. Your social media, your X, your WhatsApp, those are the platforms where African heritage can be actually presented, which calls on African creators, scholars, and leaders to use these platforms to reclaim the narrative, the African narratives, and ensuring our cultural identity thrives in the modern world.
How much of a role will the arts play in that mandate of creating stories and making sure that these agendas even meet on grassroots level as far as schools are concerned? How much of a role will the arts play in pushing this agenda of making sure that we tell our African stories, especially to the young people, the youth?
Arts has a big role to play. If you would actually look around, our culture, our customs, and our heritage possesses much of our identity. And oral history has been in the past the mode of education in our communities. And it was through art that oral and visual presentation of our culture and heritage was done. So it hasn't fallen away. It still plays a role, and it still needs to play a role. So we call upon our states, African states, to actually again rekindle the role of culture through performances, through creative arts, through artwork, that is through handwork, that is seen, identifying our culture and heritage in different communities. So we really call upon our departments, our governments, to invest more in culture and mobilize communities, because culture, what we see, the culture that is presented nowadays is through television, and it's mostly foreign cultures that we see presented in our TV screens and in social media. So it calls for the African states to actually take charge of our own narrative and our own products that are done through culture to disseminate and sensitize our communities with.
For those African leaders who do stand up when we're talking about our leadership and making sure that the economics of our continents are not exploited, for those who do stand up but end up being singled out in a negative way, for example, the political situation we can see unfolding in Burkina Faso under the leadership of Ibrahim Traoré, with reports of an alleged assassination plot targeting the president purely because of his firm stance on the minerals of that country. What call do you think this makes then to other African leaders, and is there a call?
There is a critical call that we are seeing with the situation in Burkina Faso, which actually reflects a broader struggle in Africa. So there is a need for indigenous leaders, particularly, to actually advocate for economic self-sufficiency, often face external political influence in most of the time. So African nations must form a strong security coalitions. And we have the AU, which has a role to play in protecting our states, in protecting leaders that are taking initiative for economic emancipation in Africa and in African states. So the African Union and the regional economic blocs must collectively counter foreign manipulation and build diplomatic alliances that safeguards Africa's sovereignty. Sustainable peace in Sahel region, as you have actually made reference to Burkina Faso, requires a unified strategy that strengthens local governance while deterring external interference.
Well, let's leave it there for now. Happy Africa Month, Butistembiso, and Enkosi kakhulu for your time again.
Enkosi kakhulu Siswami, and happy Africa Month to the continent and to the people of South Africa. Hopefully, as my parting shot, come next year, we will actually observe a holiday as well in South Africa for the Africa Month. Thank you.
Thanks again. Stembiso Msomi is national spokesperson for the Embo Kingdom Royal House. Enkosi kakhulu meaning thank you very much in isiXhosa, as that kingdom is part of the Xhosa clan. But let's move on and say good morning to Palesa Tao, who's going to be giving us what's coming up on
the Move.
On the Move.
How was the weekend?
Oh, the weekend was incredible. Thank you. How was yours?
It was fabulously restful.
I love that. I love that. Well, today on the Move, we're going to the conversations of the day. On today's African View, that's our debate conversation. We take a look at something that most of us really didn't like when we were younger. Homework.
Oh, I thought you were going to say broccoli.
No. Okay, well, broccoli too. But today we're looking at homework. I also hated broccoli, by the way. And there are, thoughts and views around the world that homework should be done with, and children should be able to learn everything they need to within the classroom sector. And of course, those who oppose their view. So we're going into that. Is homework really an integral part of learning, or shouldn't it be assigned to children in the home space? Janine Hammond will be chatting to us. That is the club manager for Club Engage, a provider of aftercare and holiday care in South Africa. We'll also be speaking to Obert Masarai, a national president of the Amalgamated Rural Teachers Union in Zimbabwe, and Professor Ramodungwa Netabake, the educational psychologist, in the first hour. And then we move on to speak about feminism. What exactly does the word feminist mean in today's world? A lot of people have called me a feminist, and I always say, in the way in which feminist has gotten such a bad name, I would say I'm for women. I'm not particularly a feminist, but I am for women. So we're going into that in the second hour of the show. What does feminism mean in this day and age?
Interesting show. I will be tuned in. Thank you so much for giving us an exciting lineup again today. But from us on Rise and Shine, Asanda, Beda and Peter Ndoro.
Have a good day. Here's the news with Onele Nsinsi. Bye-bye.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Well, thank you, Peter. Looking at your top stories, former Gabonese Army General Brice Nguema, formally sworn in as Gabon president, and Israeli Security Cabinet unanimously approves a plan to expand its military offensive in Gaza. Your latest news. Greetings to our listeners. The former Gabon